Hey there, tonight we're diving into how Viking explorers navigated and survived the unforgiving North Atlantic, where the truth is, their journeys were more about cunning seamanship than the Hollywood battles you might expect. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You find yourself standing on the rocky shores of Scandinavia, the wind biting through your woolen tunic as you squint across the choppy North Sea. It's the 9th century, and life hasn't exactly been a series of epic poems. Sure, you're a Viking, a word that conjures images of horned helmets and fearless plundering. But let's be honest, those helmets never had horns, and the fearlessness, more like a calculated risk driven by some pretty pressing realities. First, let's talk geography. Scandinavia is stunning, sure, but it's not exactly the Garden of Eden. You've got fjords that are as beautiful as they are impractical for farming, and a climate that's about as forgiving as a Norse god with a hangover. The land can only support so many people before it starts getting crowded. By the late 8th and early 9th centuries, your homeland is feeling the squeeze. The population is growing, and as any good Viking knows, more people mean more mouths to feed. So, what do you do when you can't grow more crops or summon extra sheep out of thin air? You look elsewhere, of course. It's not just the lack of farmland that's got you eyeing the horizon. Economic pressures are as present as the endless summer days. Sea, trade routes are expanding, and with them, the intoxicating promise of wealth. The Vikings are traders as much as they're raiders, and silver is the currency of choice. A piece of silver could get you a cow, a loaf of bread, or a night in a cozy longhouse, assuming you're not picking it up off the floor after a night of heavy drinking. But here's the catch. Silver doesn't grow on trees, and your local resources are about as abundant as a good night's sleep on a longship. You need to get out there, find new trade routes, and maybe, just maybe, relieve a monastery or two of their shiny goods. Speaking of monasteries, let's clear the air about the whole fearless Viking myth. You're not just some berserker with nothing to lose. Your expeditions are born from necessity as much as from a thirst for adventure. It's hardly a secret that monasteries are both poorly defended and well-stocked with silver and gold. So, when economic pressures mount, and the local chieftain starts talking about a voyage, you're not exactly dragging your feet. You're pragmatic, trait often overshadowed by tales of bloodthirsty raids. But here's the kicker. You're not just a raider. You're a farmer, a trader, and when the situation demands it, an explorer. The North Atlantic is a treacherous beast, but it's also a highway to opportunity. Places like the British Isles, the Frankish coast, and even the distant lands of the Slavs are in your sights. The lure of new resources is strong, and while the journey might be perilous, the rewards could be life-changing. So you gather your crew, stock your longship with supplies, and set sail. Not because you're a mindless marauder, but because the harsh realities of life in Scandinavia leave you little choice. The journey itself is no picnic. You're navigating waters that are as unpredictable as a Viking after a night of mead. The North Atlantic is notorious for its storms, and your longship, while impressively designed, isn't exactly a luxury cruise liner. It's built for speed, not comfort. You're constantly wet, cold, and tired. Yet you persist. Why? Because the promise of new lands and wealth outweighs the discomfort. Plus, you've got your crew, a band of brothers who share your hopes and fears. As you sail, you can't help but think about the stories that will be told of your exploits. Will they remember the desperation that fueled your journey, or just the treasures you bring back? The truth is, Viking expeditions are as much about survival as they are about conquest. You're not just chasing glory, you're chasing a future for your family and your community. This drive, this blend of necessity and opportunity, is what propels Viking exploration. It's not a tale of mindless violence, but of strategic ventures, calculated risks, and a little bit of luck. You're not just a conqueror, you're a product of your time, your environment, and a world that's changing faster than you can say, Valhalla. So, as you look ahead, the wind in your face and the salt spray on your lips, you know one thing for certain. This is just the beginning. The Atlantic may be vast, but so are the opportunities it holds. And you, pragmatic Viking that you are, intend to seize every last one of them. As you squint against the spray of salt and squawk of gulls, there's something you just can't ignore. The vessel beneath your feet. It's not just a means to an end. It's a marvel of 9th century innovation. You're standing on a drakkar, a 23-meter longship that's as much a masterpiece of engineering as it is a symbol of your determination. This isn't just a boat. It's your lifeline across the North Atlantic, a body of water that's more temperamental than a Norse guard on a Monday morning. Now, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Viking shipbuilding. The drakkar and its ilk weren't just thrown together with whatever logs were lying around. Oh no, these ships were the sports cars of their day, crafted with precision and purpose. The longship's hull, for instance, is made from overlapped planks in a technique known as clinker building. This genius design not only enhances strength, but also flexibility, allowing the ship to glide over waves rather than plow through them. Think of it as the difference between a ballet dancer and a linebacker, grace versus brute force. But let's talk about the wallet, shall we? Building one of these beauties wasn't cheap. The cost of a longship in silver could range anywhere from the equivalent of a small herd of cattle to the price of a modest estate. We're talking about 100 to 120 ounces of silver, at a time when a single ounce could buy you a couple of cows or a year's supply of mead. This wasn't pocket change. You didn't just wake up one day and decide to build a ship. You needed backers, patrons, maybe even a few well-placed allies who owed you a favor or two. And then there's the wood. Not just any timber would do. You needed oak, strong, durable, and able to take a beating from both the ocean waves and the axes that shaped it. Then there were the iron nails, or rivets, which were actually a bit of a luxury item themselves. Iron wasn't exactly growing on trees in Scandinavia. It took a lot of effort to smelt and shape. Each ship could require hundreds of these rivets, not to mention the manpower to forge them. It's no wonder that longships were often owned by chieftains or wealthy traders. They were the private jets of the Viking elite, capable of carrying up to 60 men across the sea. Of course, a ship is only as good as the crew that sails it. Navigation was the name of the game, and let's just say that the Vikings didn't have GPS. They relied on the sun, the stars, and an uncanny ability to read the sea and skies. On cloudy days, they might have used a sunstone, a piece of calcite crystal that helped locate the sun's position through overcast skies. It sounds like magic, but it's pure science, and it worked. These navigational skills were passed down like family heirlooms, a testament to the Vikings' adaptability and ingenuity. But let's bust a myth while we're at it. Viking journeys weren't just chaotic raids. Sure, there were raids, and they were as bloody as they were profitable. But these ships were also trade vessels, exploration tools, and even diplomatic channels. The ships weren't just about taking, they were about connecting. The Vikings traded everything from furs and amber to slaves and walrus ivory. These were business trips as much as they were adventures. The longship was a canvas of opportunity, painted with equal parts ambition and necessity. It was a testament to human ingenuity, a floating contradiction of terror and trade. The same ship that could strike fear into the hearts of coastal villagers could also bring silks, spices, and stories from lands far beyond the Scandinavian horizon. And speaking of horizons, you couldn't just set sail willy-nilly. Planning a voyage was a strategic operation. You needed to know the winds, the currents, even the migratory patterns of whales and seabirds. You see, the North Atlantic is a fickle beast. Its weather as unpredictable as a Viking after a tankard of ale. But with the right ship, the right crew, and a little bit of luck, the possibilities were as vast as the ocean itself. So as you stand there, the world stretching out before you, remember this. A Viking's life was a delicate balance of risk and reward. You weren't just a warrior. You were a navigator, a builder, a trader. The longship was your tool, your weapon, your home. It was the key to survival in a world where the stakes were as high as the waves you sailed. And with each journey, you carved a path not just through the water, but through history itself. So you're standing there, your boots on the deck of this engineering marvel, and you're probably thinking, all right, let's hit the high seas and see what happens. But whoa, slow down there, sailor. Before you can hoist the sail and shout, Valhalla awaits. There's a whole lot of backstage work to tackle. Just like you wouldn't throw a house party without a guest list and a fridge full of ale, a Viking voyage wasn't something you embarked on solo or half-cocked. It was a community production, with every player from the village chief to the leatherworker having a role. First off, you need a crew, and trust me, it's not just about grabbing the nearest axe-wielding neighbor. You're looking for a band of brothers who can handle the sea's mood swings and the possibility of not seeing land for weeks. Each oarsman, navigator, and lookout is handpicked. Think of it as the ultimate team draft, where the stakes are life and death, not just a few pints at the local mead hall. And it's not just physical strength you're after. These guys need to have the mental fortitude to face the endless horizon without cracking under pressure. Now, let's talk economics, because nothing happens without a little, or a lot, of silver changing hands. Viking expeditions were far from spontaneous. They were investments, with villagers pooling resources, hoping for a return that would make up for the year's poor harvest or the lack of trade goods. The cost of outfitting a longship for a journey could rival the price of its construction, sometimes 200 ounces of silver or more. That's enough to buy a herd of cattle, or, if you're into luxury, a whole lot of mead. So, it's all hands on deck when it comes to preparing for the journey, literally and figuratively. But why would people risk their hard-earned silver? Simple: shared risk, shared reward. The spoils of a successful raid or trade venture were divvied up not just among the crew, but with those who stayed behind. It's the original profit-sharing scheme, except instead of stock options, you're getting a portion of loot from a monastery or the proceeds from a cartload of furs. This communal investment meant everyone had skin in the game, and when the longship returned, the whole village would be waiting to see their slice of the pie, or at least the next round of ale. Now, let's not forget the social ladder, because Viking society wasn't exactly a free-for-all. Leadership roles on these expeditions often fell to the chieftains or the wealthier traders who had the most to gain and the most to lose. They were the ones calling the shots, deciding the route, and negotiating trades. And they didn't just pick up this role because they looked good in a fur cape. Leadership was earned through a track record of successful voyages and an uncanny ability to make the right call when the chips were down. You wanted a leader who could not only outsmart a storm, but also spot a good trade deal from a mile away. The chieftain status wasn't just a matter of birthright or wealth. It was about charisma and cunning. A leader had to inspire confidence in the crew, rallying them in the face of adversity, and let's face it, keep them from turning on each other when cabin fever set in. It's no small feat to keep a ship full of restless Vikings focused on the prize rather than each other's throats. But here's a nugget for you. These communal preparations weren't just about who could swing a sword or haggle over a barrel of salted fish. The women back home played a crucial role too. They were the ones left to manage the farms, ensuring that when the menfolk returned, they had a home to come back to. And let's not overlook the fact that when it came to crafting the sails, spinning wool, and preparing food supplies, the women were indispensable. They weren't just waiting by the hearth. They were vital cogs in the Viking machine, oiling the gears of exploration with their labor and expertise. The social hierarchy on the ship was a microcosm of the village itself. The ship's officer was like a minute chief, and the crew had their own pecking order, from the seasoned sailor to the greenhorn, who always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. These roles were fluid, though, based on merit as much as seniority. If you proved yourself in a storm or a skirmish, you could find yourself climbing the ranks faster than a Viking can drain a horn of ale. So, as you stand on that deck, with your eyes on the horizon, remember, every oar stroke and every knot in the sail is the culmination of a society working in concert. You're not just a lone wolf on the prowl. You're part of a pack, each member playing their part in a symphony of survival and ambition. This isn't just a voyage. It's a testament to the power of community and the lengths people will go to secure a better future. And with that, you're not just setting sail on the ocean. You're navigating the tides of history. Each wave you crest is a step toward a new chapter in the Viking saga, one written not just in blood and plunder, but in the sweat and dreams of those who dared to venture beyond the known world. The sea is calling, and with every gust of wind, you're reminded of the promise it holds and the legacy you're about to carve into its depths. And so, with the wind whipping through your hair and the horizon stretching out like an eternal promise, you set sail. But before you get too caught up in visions of glory and gold, let's take a cold, hard look at what you're really signing up for. Life at sea isn't exactly a Nordic fairy tale. It's more like a survival reality show with zero prize money and a very real chance of meeting your maker in the icy depths of the North Atlantic. First up, let's talk about your living conditions on this floating marvel. Forget private cabins and buffet meals. Think cramped quarters and a diet that would make a modern nutritionist weep. You're packed in with your fellow crew members like sardines in a tin, except you wish you had sardines because the menu consists mostly of dried fish, hardtack, and whatever pickled items you can stomach. Fresh food is a distant memory, and those barrels of beer you're praying will last the journey. They're more precious than gold. But hey, at least you're not going to starve. Viking ingenuity kicks in with food preservation techniques that keep you munching along, albeit not gourmet style. You've got dried fish. Think of it as the Viking version of beef jerky, hanging everywhere, and salted meats that taste more like salt than meat. It's not exciting, but it's enough to keep you going. And you might not love sour milk, but fermented dairy products like Skyer have enough probiotics to keep you from keeling over too soon. It's all about calories, baby, not culinary delight. Speaking of keeling over, let's not ignore the specter of scurvy, the dreaded disease that's more synonymous with 18th century pirates than Vikings was still a lurking threat. Without vitamin C, your gums start bleeding, your teeth loosen, and your strength dwindles faster than your patience with that one crew member who snores like a dying walrus. Fortunately, the Vikings had a secret weapon, the humble yet life-saving bilberry. Packed with vitamin C, these berries were dried and stored for the journey, providing just enough of a nutritional punch to stave off the scurvy monster. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Now, let's navigate our way to the topic of, well, navigation. You're sailing blind, right? Wrong. The Vikings were navigational wizards, using everything from the stars to the flight patterns of birds to guide their way. And then there's the infamous sunstone. Sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. A magical crystal that reveals the sun's position on overcast days. But it's not magic, it's science. The actual mineral, likely Iceland spar, can polarize light and help locate the sun even when it's hidden behind clouds. It's a tool in your arsenal, an ace up your woolen sleeve, proving that Vikings knew a thing or two about reading the natural world. But despite all this know-how, the sea remains a formidable foe. You're at the mercy of the elements, and nature doesn't care how many successful raids you've pulled off. Storms appear out of nowhere, tossing your longship like a toy boat in a child's bath. You're bailing water, pulling oars, and praying to any guard who'll listen. Your invincibility? Yeah, it's as much a myth as those horned helmets. Even the best-laid plans can be thwarted by a sudden squall or an unexpected iceberg. That's the reality of the North Atlantic. Beautiful but brutal. A highway and a hazard all rolled into one. Your longship might be a masterpiece of engineering, but it's still a wooden vessel in a vast, unpredictable ocean. The Vikings weren't fearless. They were realists, fully aware of the risks that came with chasing opportunity across the sea. And while you might think of Vikings as the original bad boys of the medieval world, there's a softer side to all this seafaring bravado. Every voyage is a gamble, a roll of the dice where the stakes are your life and the lives of your crew. It's not just about the loot, it's about returning home. It's about surviving the journey against all odds to bring back tales and treasures to those waiting in the village. You're not just a plunderer, you're a provider, a bringer of hope and prosperity, even if it comes at a steep cost. So let's bust another myth while we're at it. The idea that Vikings were reckless marauders, driven only by bloodlust and greed. Sure, there were raids, and they were as brutal as they were profitable. But beneath the surface, there's a layer of pragmatism, a savvy understanding of the world and its workings. You're not just out for a quick smash and grab. You're playing the long game, a strategy of survival that's as much about brains as it is about brawn. As you ride the waves, you're not just navigating the ocean, you're navigating history itself. Each decision, each stroke of the oar, adds to the legacy of the Vikings, not just as warriors, but as explorers, traders, and survivors. Your journey is a testament to human resilience, a saga of survival in the face of nature's indifference. So, hold on tight and keep your eyes on the horizon, because this adventure is far from over. The North Atlantic is your stage, and the world is watching as you carve out your place in its history. Yet, as you carve your path through the churning waters, it's time to confront a reality as stark as the fjords back home. Vikings weren't just the rock stars of medieval marauding. Sure, it's fun to think of them as the original bad boys of the high seas, swinging axes and plundering monasteries like they're the local convenience store. But that's just one verse of a much longer saga. Have you ever heard of the Vikings as traders, settlers, and cultural ambassadors? No. Well, brace yourself, because we're about to flip the script on these so-called scoundrels. First, let's talk trade. Forget the one-dimensional image of Vikings as helmeted hooligans. They were more akin to medieval middlemen. By the 9th and 10th centuries, these seafaring entrepreneurs had established trade networks stretching from the icy shores of Greenland to the bustling bazaars of Baghdad. Yes, you heard right, Baghdad. These Norsemen weren't just crossing the North Sea, they were crisscrossing continents. They swapped fur and amber for silver and spices, turning their longships into floating markets. Picture a Viking garage sale, but instead of old furniture, you're haggling over bear pelts and walrus ivory. But let's not sugarcoat it. Trade was risky business. With every transaction came the threat of piracy, betrayal, or just a good old-fashioned double-cross. Yet, the rewards outweighed the risks. By the time the Vikings were done, they'd spread Scandinavian influence across Europe faster than you can say Lindisfarne. And they didn't just trade goods, they exchanged ideas. They picked up innovations like coinage and shipbuilding techniques, taking them back to Scandinavia, where they sparked economic transformations. It turns out, Vikings were more interested in market shares than sword shares. Now, let's set sail to another side of Viking life. Settlement. If you think the Vikings were all about smash-and-grab raids, think again. They were also pioneers and settlers, founding colonies in some of the most inhospitable places on Earth. From the lush pastures of Ireland to the volcanic landscapes of Iceland, these Norse adventurers weren't just raiding and pillaging, they were putting down roots. In fact, by the year 1000, Iceland was home to over 60,000 Vikings, turning it into a bustling community complete with the world's first parliament, the Althing, established in 930 AD. Turns out, these so-called barbarians were laying the groundwork for modern democratic institutions. And while Iceland was a political experiment, Greenland was more of a real estate gamble. Settled by Eric the Red around 985 AD, it was a harsh land that demanded resilience and ingenuity. But hey, if you can make it in Greenland, you can make it anywhere, right? The Norse settlements there lasted for 500 years, a testament to their adaptability. They farmed, hunted seals, and traded with the Inuit, showing that even in the Arctic, Vikings weren't just surviving, they were thriving. But perhaps their boldest move was the voyage to North America, landing in a place they called Vinland around 1000 AD. Led by Leif Erikson, these Norse explorers reached the shores of what is now Newfoundland, beating Columbus to the punch by nearly 500 years. While the settlement was short-lived, it proved these Vikings were not just marauders, but the original globetrotters. Now, let's tackle the cultural exchanges that these voyages fostered. It wasn't all about loot and land. The Vikings were cultural chameleons, adapting and adopting wherever they went. They brought their stories, art, and religion, while also absorbing elements from the peoples they encountered. In doing so, they enriched the tapestry of medieval Europe. Their intricate artwork became a hallmark of art across the continent, and their sagas, filled with tales of gods and heroes, became a cornerstone of Western literature. They even left their mark on the English language, with words like berserk and ransack becoming part of the lexicon. Fittingly enough, right? And speaking of legacy, let's bust one last myth, the horned helmet. Sorry to burst your bubble, but Vikings never wore them. This fanciful idea was cooked up in the 19th century by costume designers looking to add some flair to Wagner's operas. In reality, Viking helmets were practical, made for protection, not pageantry. But the image stuck, infiltrating popular culture like a catchy jingle you just can't shake. While the real Vikings might have scoffed at such impractical headgear, the legend endures, a testament to their enduring impact on our imagination. So, what's the takeaway from this Nordic saga? The Vikings were far more complex than their fearsome reputations suggest. They were traders, settlers, and cultural conduits, bridging worlds and shaping history in ways that continue to resonate today. They were as skilled at negotiating a trade deal as they were at swinging a battle axe, as interested in building communities as they were in burning them down. They were a paradox, a blend of brawn and brains, violence and vision. As you drift off into dreams of longships and distant shores, remember this. The story of the Vikings is not just a tale of conquest, but a narrative of survival and adaptation. It's a reminder that history is not written in black and white, but in shades of grey, with characters as complex and multifaceted as the world they navigated. So next time you hear the word Viking, think beyond the horned helmets and raiding parties. Think of the traders, the explorers, the settlers who ventured into the unknown, leaving a legacy as vast and varied as the oceans they sailed. Mary Tudor's early life was a full-blown episode of Tudor Dynasty, preschool edition, featuring political chess games and more drama than a soap opera. Born on February 18, 1516, in the opulent confines of Greenwich Palace, she was the first surviving child of King Henry Roman VIII and Catherine of Aragon. The word surviving is doing a lot of work here, considering the couple's previous 5 attempts at producing a healthy heir. Mary was in every sense a precious little pawn in the grand game of European power. As a Tudor princess, Mary's life wasn't just about playing with wooden toys or learning needlework, though she did those too. From her first breath, she was the living manifestation of England's diplomatic strategies. By the ripe old age of 2, Mary was already engaged to the Dauphin of France, Francis. That's right, a toddler was betrothed to a toddler in a move that screamed, "Let's unite our kingdoms, and not just our playpens." This engagement, like many of its kind, was less about wedding bells and more about political alliances. Spoiler alert, this engagement was about as permanent as a sandcastle at high tide. Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon, was no average queen. She was a powerhouse of education and strategy, having been educated herself by some of the finest minds of the time. Catherine made sure Mary didn't miss this memo. Under her mother's watchful eye, Mary was schooled in the classics, not just the ABCs and 123s, but Latin, music, and even some Greek. Catherine was determined that Mary would not be just another pretty face in the Tudor gallery. She wanted her daughter to wield knowledge like a sword, even if she couldn't actually wield a sword because, well, Tudor gender norms. Now, let's talk about the elephant, or rather the Pope, in the room. You see, the Tudors were a bit obsessed with having a male heir. This obsession led King Henry Roman VIII to become the medieval version of a serial monogamist, kicking off the English Reformation when the Pope wouldn't let him divorce Catherine to marry Anne Boleyn. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For young Mary, this meant her life was a constant whirlwind of changing alliances and shifting loyalties. One day she was the apple of her father's eye, and the next she was a bargaining chip in a deal that never quite closed. Mary's early years were spent moving between royal residences like Hampton Court Palace and Ludlow Castle, each more grandiose than the last. Picture it, a childhood where your backyard is a sprawling, meticulously manicured garden, and your playdates involve the sons and daughters of dukes and duchesses. Sounds charming, right? Except that every smile at court was lined with the sharp edge of ambition and treachery. Trust was a luxury Mary could rarely afford. In the background of Mary's idyllic yet precarious upbringing was the ever-looming spectre of religion. The religious landscape of Europe in the early 16th century was a tinderbox waiting for a match. Catholicism was the dominant force, but whispers of change were stirring. Martin Luther had nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church in 1517, just a year after Mary was born. Talk about timing. While young Mary was learning to read, Europe was reading Luther's rebellious manifesto, setting the stage for a continent-wide upheaval that would eventually shape Mary's destiny. Mary's education wasn't solely in dusty tomes and Latin conjugations. She was also schooled in the fine art of court etiquette, a survival skill in the Tudor court's shark tank. Knowing when to smile, curtsy, or keep one's mouth shut could mean the difference between favor and disgrace. Mary learned these lessons well, but she also inherited her mother's steely resolve. Catherine of Aragon was a woman who famously led troops against the Scots while Henry was off gallivanting in France. Mary would need every ounce of inherited grit to navigate the treacherous waters of her future. Despite the personal and political storms swirling around her, Mary was a child who knew the warmth of a mother's love. Catherine doted on her daughter and shielded her as best she could from the turbulence of court life. But even a mother's love couldn't keep the winds of change at bay. By the time Mary was 11, the world she knew was about to be turned upside down, not least by her own father's marital adventures. As Mary grew older, the prospect of her marriage became a matter of international intrigue. Forget teenage crushes. Mary's potential suitors were more about power than puppy love. Proposals flew in from all corners of Europe, each a calculated move in the chess game of diplomacy. But as the tides of favor and fortune ebbed and flowed, so too did Mary's marital prospects. Her hand in marriage was offered to Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, but like so many Tudor negotiations, this one also fizzled out, leaving Mary once again as a high-value piece on the board, but with no checkmate in sight. By her teenage years, Mary was a seasoned player in the Game of Thrones, even if she hadn't yet ascended to the role that would earn her a bloody nickname. She had learned to navigate the treacherous waters of the Tudor court, balancing the competing interests of those who saw her as a pawn, a threat, or a potential ally. Her childhood was a masterclass in survival, a lesson that would prove invaluable in the turbulent years to come. Mary Tudor's early life was a blend of privilege and peril, of royal splendor shadowed by political maneuvering. She was a child of the Tudor dynasty, born into a world where power was the currency and marriage the marketplace. As she grew, she would carry the weight of her lineage and the expectations of her birthright, stepping onto a stage that was set for drama, conflict, and transformation. In the next act of her life, the stakes would only grow higher, as the personal and political collided in ways that would shape England's future and redefine Mary's place in history. But for now, she remained a Tudor princess, poised on the brink of an uncertain destiny, with the echoes of her mother's guidance and the shadow of her father's ambitions looming ever larger. Mary Tudor's teenage years, much like a Shakespearean drama, were filled with intrigue, emotional upheavals, and enough plot twists to make a soap opera look like a walk in the park. As the daughter of Henry Roman VIII, she was no stranger to the volatility of Tudor politics, where one day you're sipping the finest wine in the land, and the next, you're questioning whether you'll still have your head attached at the end of dinner. Henry, in his quest for a male heir, was about to upend Mary's world, and as a side effect, the religious landscape of England. Let's dive right into the scandal that rocked England and sent waves across Europe, Henry's marital escapades. Henry's obsession with a male heir was like a bad case of the hiccups, persistent and incredibly inconvenient. He'd been married to Mary's mother, Catherine of Aragon, for over 2 decades, and yet the only surviving child of their union was Mary. Anne Boleyn, the captivating lady-in-waiting who was about to become the catalyst for a seismic shift in England's religious life. Henry's desire to marry Anne and his desperation for a male heir led him to seek an annulment from Catherine. The Pope, however, wasn't about to be bamboozled by Henry's demands. The political implications of annulling a marriage to Charles V's aunt, yes, that's Catherine, weren't lost on him. Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, was a powerful dude, and angering him was akin to poking a bear with a very short stick. The papal rejection wasn't just a personal slight to Henry, but also a monumental setback to his dynastic ambitions. This is where things get juicy. In 1533, Henry, not one to take no for an answer, decided to take matters into his own hands, literally. He declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England, effectively giving the Pope a Tudor-style middle finger. The Act of Supremacy in 1534 formalized this break, and voila, the Church of England was born. It was like the rockiest breakup ever, but instead of splitting up mutual friends, England was now split from the Catholic Church. Henry's divorce from Catherine was finalized, and he married Anne Boleyn. What could possibly go wrong? Well, plenty, as it turns out. Mary, once the darling of the Tudor court, was unceremoniously declared illegitimate following her parents' annulment. Her title was stripped, and she was demoted from Princess of Wales to Lady Mary. Talk about a royal downgrade. This wasn't just a blow to her ego, it had very real political implications. Her status as a legitimate heir was now in question, leaving her in a precarious position in the line of succession. For Mary, this was akin to having the rug pulled out from under her feet, with no soft landing in sight. Financially, Henry's divorces were about as economical as a royal banquet for 1,000. The costs were staggering, and the court was hemorrhaging money to keep up with the king's whims. To fund his new religious endeavors and personal projects, Henry began the dissolution of the monasteries, seizing their wealth and assets. This wasn't just a grab for cash. It was a systematic dismantling of centuries-old institutions. The monasteries were pillars of community life, providing education, healthcare, and charity. Their dissolution led to widespread social and economic disruption, leaving many destitute. Back at court, the gossip mill was working overtime. Anne Boleyn's rise to queen consort had made her both admired and reviled. The courtiers were abuzz with whispers, rumors, and enough backstabbing to make a Game of Thrones plotline look like a church picnic. Anne was a polarizing figure, and her influence over Henry was both her greatest asset and her potential downfall. She gave birth to Elizabeth in 1533, but the longed-for male heir remained as elusive as a ghost in a fog. For Mary, the court became a hostile environment. Her refusal to acknowledge her father's new marriage or her own illegitimacy put her in a dangerous position. She was isolated, with her household staff dismissed and her movements closely watched. It was a tense standoff between father and daughter, with neither willing to budge. Yet, Mary's resolve was as solid as the tower of London's stone walls. She held firm to her Catholic faith and her belief in her legitimacy, setting the stage for future conflicts. Henry's break from Rome wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was a political masterstroke. By establishing the Church of England, he not only secured his divorce, but also consolidated his power over religious and state affairs. This was a historic shift, and its ramifications were felt far beyond the walls of the royal palace. The English Reformation was underway, changing the religious, social, and political fabric of the nation. Meanwhile, Mary's life was a series of calculated moves and countermoves. Her relationship with her father was strained, and she was caught in a web of political machinations. Every smile, every word, every gesture was scrutinized, and the wrong move could spell disaster. Yet through it all, Mary remained steadfast, a testament to her mother's influence and her own indomitable spirit. The precariousness of succession was a constant undercurrent in Tudor England. With Henry's male heir still a distant dream, Mary's position was both tenuous and crucial. She was a pawn in a much larger game, yet her presence on the board was significant. Her legitimacy crisis was not just a personal struggle, but a reflection of the broader tensions within the realm. Despite the turmoil, Mary managed to navigate the treacherous waters of her teenage years with a mixture of caution and defiance. Her ability to survive in a court as dangerous as it was dazzling was a testament to her resilience and cunning. She had learned the lessons of survival well, lessons that would prove invaluable in the years to come. In this tumultuous period, the legend of Bloody Mary was still wading in the wings. But for now, she was a young woman grappling with the fallout of her father's decisions, the shifting sands of power, and her own uncertain future. The stage was set for the next act in her life, one that would see her rise to power and face challenges that would define her legacy. For Mary, the story was far from over, and the best, or perhaps the worst, was yet to come. As Mary stood on the brink of destiny, the scene was set for the ultimate Tudor showdown. Picture a court teeming with intrigue, where allegiances shifted like the English weather. Henry Roman VIII, her father, was now off the scene, leaving the throne to his sickly son, Edward VI. The boy king was more into Protestant reform than his own survival, setting the stage for a familial Game of Thrones that would make even the most cunning Machiavelli clutch his pearls. Mary's path to power was riddled with more traps than a medieval dungeon. Following Edward's death in 1553, our girl Mary found herself in the middle of a succession crisis that was messier than a Tudor feast. Enter stage right. Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, a political pawn crowned by those who fancied a Protestant puppet. But Mary was having none of it. With the tenacity of a bulldog and the support of those who were fed up with religious flip-flopping, she swept in and took her rightful place on the throne. Like a chess player finally seeing the checkmate, Mary became the first Queen Regnant of England, a title she snatched with the resolute grip of someone who'd had enough of being a piece on the board. Let's talk marriage, shall we? Because in the 16th century, a queen without a king was like a ship without a sail. Enter Philip Roman II of Spain, her cousin, and the poster boy for Habsburg chin and Catholic fervor. Their union was one part political strategy, one part fairy tale gone wrong, like Cinderella, if the shoe didn't fit, and the prince was more interested in papal bulls than ballroom dances. Philip was a pragmatic choice, as their marriage aimed to bolster Catholic ties and unite two powerful kingdoms. But newsflash, marrying for politics rather than love doesn't usually end well. The English were about as thrilled with the match as they would be with a Spanish armada at their shores. Spoiler alert, they get that too, but not just yet. The economic implications of this union were like a double-edged sword. Philip's presence was supposed to bring stability and Spanish gold, but instead it drained England's coffers faster than a fleet of leaky ships. The marriage treaty ensured that England wouldn't become a Spanish colony, but Mary's choice to marry Philip was about as popular as a tax increase. The dowry was substantial, but the cost to national pride was even greater. The English, fiercely independent and frankly a bit xenophobic, weren't keen on foreign rulers. Picture a nation clutching its pearls, worried that their beloved England was being sold off piece by piece. And now, the moment you've been waiting for, the moniker Bloody Mary. No, it's not just a brunch cocktail. It's a title Mary earned through her determined efforts to restore Catholicism. The Marian persecutions, as they are now known, saw about 300 Protestants meeting their fiery end at the stake. It was a time when religious fervor was as combustible as the bonfires that consumed dissenters. Mary's goal was to turn back the Protestant tide, but in doing so, she stained her legacy with the scarlet letter of fanaticism. Her actions were as much about political survival as they were about faith, a desperate attempt to reassert control over a kingdom divided by doctrine. But let's not paint Mary as a one-dimensional villain in a Disney drama. Her actions were driven by a sincere belief that she was saving souls from eternal damnation. In her eyes, Protestantism wasn't just heretical. It was a one-way ticket to hell. The persecutions were brutal, yes, but in her mind, the stakes were higher than just a crown. They were eternal. Mary's reign was an attempt to rewind history's clock. But alas, time has a way of moving forward, not backward. The economic landscape during Mary's reign was a tapestry of challenges and reform. Mary inherited a kingdom that was financially wobbly, thanks to her father's extravagant lifestyle and her brother's religious reforms. She made attempts to stabilize the economy, implementing fiscal reforms that were about as exciting as watching paint dry, but necessary to keep the realm afloat. Coinage reform and naval expansion were on the agenda, aiming to boost trade and military capability. Yet, the economic benefits were overshadowed by the political and religious turmoil that characterized her reign. Mary's marriage to Philip, while politically strategic, was a personal disaster. The couple spent more time apart than together, with Philip more interested in his European territories than in playing house in England. It's hard to blame him entirely. England was a damp and dreary contrast to the sunlit courts of Spain. Their marriage was childless, a personal tragedy for Mary who longed for an heir. The phantom pregnancies she experienced were a cruel twist of fate, adding another layer of personal sorrow to her already tumultuous reign. Despite the failures and controversies, Mary's reign wasn't without its accomplishments. Her focus on naval expansion laid the groundwork for England's future maritime dominance. She also strengthened the administrative efficiency of the government, a necessary step for a modernizing nation. Yet, these achievements were overshadowed by the religious persecutions and the unpopular Spanish marriage, leaving her legacy tarnished by the fires of Smithfield and the whispers of discontented subjects. In the end, Mary's reign is a testament to the perilous nature of power and the complexity of human ambition. She was a woman of conviction, caught in the crossfire of history, determined to forge a path that aligned with her beliefs. Her story is a reminder that history is not just about the victors, but about those who dared to challenge the status quo, even at great personal cost. As England's first queen regnant, Mary paved the way for future female monarchs, even if her path was strewn with the ashes of controversy. The tale of Mary Tudor is far from over, and as history marches on, so too does the complexity of her legacy. With Elizabeth waiting in the wings, the stage is set for a new chapter in England's tumultuous saga. One where the echoes of Mary's reign would reverberate through the corridors of power long after her death. For now, let's leave Mary as she was, a queen who dared to defy convention, caught between the demands of her heart and the harsh realities of her time. As we turn the page from Mary's stormy reign, the echoes of her policies and decisions reverberate through the halls of history, leaving us to grapple with the tangled web of her legacy. How did Mary Tudor a queen surrounded by the testosterone-fueled politics of the 16th century aimed to navigate the treacherous waters of a male-dominated political scene. Spoiler, it was a bit like trying to steer a ship through a hurricane with a map written in Latin, complicated and fraught with challenges. First, let's dive into her currency reform, because nothing screams excitement like Tudor-era fiscal policy. Right. When Mary took the throne in 1553, England's currency was about as stable as a three-legged stool. Her father, Henry Roman VIII, had devalued the currency to fund his extravagant lifestyle, leading to what can only be described as a financial hangover. Mary, with her eyes set on economic recovery, embarked on what was essentially a Tudor version of a financial detox. In 1558, Mary and her council initiated a plan to restore the silver content of coins, a move that was as necessary as it was ambitious. The reform aimed to stabilize the economy by curbing inflation and restoring public confidence in English money. It was a bit like trying to fix a leaky boat while still at sea. Risky, but absolutely vital. Her monetary reform, though overshadowed by her religious policies, was a significant attempt to bring some much-needed stability to a kingdom teetering on the edge of economic despair. Moving from coins to cannons, let's assess Mary's military endeavors. Now, Mary wasn't exactly Henry V on the battlefield, but she wasn't steering clear of military matters either. During her reign, she focused on strengthening the navy, understanding that a robust maritime force was essential for national security. The Spanish marriage was supposed to bring more muscle to England's naval ambitions, but instead, it felt like a splash of cold water, a rude awakening to the complexities of international alliances. Mary's reign wasn't just about the clash of swords and the chime of coins. It was also a time of profound societal shifts. Her efforts to navigate the male-dominated political scene were like playing chess with half the pieces missing. She had to assert her authority in a world that often viewed women as fragile ornaments rather than rulers. Despite this, Mary made some strategic appointments, bringing in advisors who were loyal and, crucially, competent. These moves were like assembling a royal Avengers team, albeit one more focused on governance than superhero antics. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the bonfire in the history books, the Bloody Mary legend. While it's true that her reign was marked by religious persecution, it's also important to put these actions into context. During her 5-year reign, around 300 Protestants were executed. Grim numbers, for sure. But when compared to her predecessors and successors, Mary's actions were not uniquely Tudor in their brutality. The moniker Bloody Mary has since overshadowed her actual intentions and policies, reducing a complex ruler to a one-dimensional villain in the popular imagination. Mary's religious policies were driven by genuine belief. She wasn't setting the pious alight for kicks. She was operating under the conviction that she was saving souls from eternal damnation. To her, Protestantism wasn't just a different way to worship. It was a threat to the very fabric of salvation. It's a stark reminder that the road to hell is often paved with good intentions, or in this case, lined with firewood. Public perception of Mary during her reign was a mixed bag. On one hand, she was seen as a defender of the faith, a queen who stood firm in her beliefs despite the odds. On the other, she was perceived as an inflexible ruler, too rigid in her Catholic convictions to adapt to the rapidly changing religious landscape. This duality made her a figure of both reverence and revulsion, a testament to the divisive nature of her policies. Fast forward to the present, and Mary's image has been through the historical ringer. Today, she's often remembered more for her nickname than her nuanced legacy. Her efforts to stabilize the economy and assert her authority in a patriarchal society are frequently eclipsed by the fiery end of her religious opponents. Yet, as we peel back the layers of legend, we find a ruler as complex as the time she lived in, a woman who dared to govern in a man's world, armed with little more than conviction and the occasional misstep. As we sift through the ashes of Mary's reign, we find a queen who was both a product of her time and a defier of its conventions. Her legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, faith, and power, each colored by the turbulent era in which she lived. Mary Tudor was more than the sum of her moniker. She was a sovereign who sought to leave her mark on a kingdom caught in the throes of change. And while history hasn't always been kind to her, it's clear that her story is far from over. As we prepare to explore the next chapter of this tumultuous saga, we find ourselves on the brink of understanding the full scope of Mary's impact on England's past, present, and future. As we dig deeper into the legacy of Mary Tudor, let's unravel the complex tapestry she left behind, a tapestry woven with threads of ambition, faith, and a touch of scorched earth. Mary's reign may have been short-lived, clocking in at just 5 years, but her impact on England was anything but ephemeral. She set the stage for the religious and political drama that followed, providing a cautionary tale of what happens when belief clashes with the unyielding tide of change. Mary's religious zeal was a double-edged sword, cutting both ways through England's spiritual landscape. Her fierce determination to restore Catholicism was like trying to reattach a limb that had already been severed. By the time she ascended the throne in 1553, Protestantism had sunk its roots deep into English soil, thanks to her father's ecclesiastical reshuffle and her brother Edward VI's Protestant reforms. Mary's attempts to reverse this tide were as futile as trying to hold back the ocean with a broom. Her reign saw the persecution of Protestants, an act meant to purify the nation, but one that left a bloody stain on her legacy, earning her that infamous nickname. But here's where the plot thickens. Mary's fervor may have inadvertently set the stage for her half-sister Elizabeth's success. You see, Elizabeth I, the original Virgin Queen, learned a thing or two from Mary's fiery tenure. When Elizabeth took the throne in 1558, she opted for a more pragmatic approach, balancing the scales between Catholic and Protestant factions with the finesse of a tightrope walker over a pit of crocodiles. Elizabeth's moderate religious policies, known as the Elizabethan religious settlement, were a masterclass in compromise, ensuring that neither side felt completely sidelined. Talk about learning from your sister's mistakes. Mary's economic policies also deserve a second look. Her attempts to stabilize the currency were like applying a band-aid to a bullet wound, but they did lay the groundwork for future reform. Elizabeth capitalized on these efforts, bolstering the economy through savvy trade agreements and the exploitation of New World resources. Elizabeth's reign saw the flowering of the English Renaissance, a cultural and economic boom that was, in part, made possible by Mary's earlier groundwork. It's a classic case of one sibling sowing the seeds that another would harvest. On the political front, Mary's reign demonstrated the pitfalls of foreign alliances, offering a cautionary tale for future monarchs. Her marriage to Philip Roman II of Spain was intended as a strategic alliance, but it was about as popular as a cold shower in winter. The English were wary of foreign influence, and Mary's Spanish connection only fueled xenophobic fears. Elizabeth, ever the astute observer, wisely steered clear of marriage altogether, using her single status as a diplomatic tool. The lesson: sometimes the absence of a crown prince is more powerful than the presence of a king consort. Despite the turbulence of her reign, Mary Tudor's legacy is more than just the sum of her fiery acts. She was a woman who dared to defy convention, ruling in an era where female sovereignty was as rare as a solar eclipse. Mary's determination to assert her authority in a male-dominated world paved the way for future queens, proving that women could wield power with as much conviction as their male counterparts. Her story is a reminder that even those whose reigns are marred by controversy can leave an indelible mark on history. The evolution of Mary's historical portrayal is a testament to the enduring power of myth-making. Over the centuries, the legend of Bloody Mary has overshadowed the more nuanced aspects of her reign. She's been cast as a villain in the grand Tudor narrative, her actions exaggerated and simplified to fit a dramatic storyline. It's the kind of myth that's easy to latch onto, the fiery queen with a penchant for pyres, but one that doesn't do justice to the complexities of her rule. Modern perceptions of Mary are slowly shifting as historians dig deeper into the archives and paint a more balanced picture. She's no longer seen solely as the tyrant of Protestant nightmares, but as a ruler shaped by the pressures of her time. Her legacy is being re-evaluated, with scholars acknowledging both her failures and her contributions to the Tudor dynasty. In the grand tapestry of history, Mary is emerging not just as a cautionary tale, but as a figure of resilience and determination. So, as we close the chapter on Mary Tudor, let's remember her not just as Bloody Mary, but as a queen who dared to stand firm in her beliefs, even when the world seemed determined to push her aside. Her reign was a turbulent one, marked by both conviction and controversy, but it was also a stepping stone for the queens who followed. In the end, Mary's story is a reminder that history is not just about the victors, but about those who dared to forge their own path, even at great personal cost. As we bid adieu to the fiery queen, we're left with the knowledge that history's legends are often more intricate than they first appear. Mary Tudor's legacy is a testament to the complexities of power, belief, and the indomitable spirit of a woman who dared to rule in a man's world. Her story is far from over, as the echoes of her reign continue to resonate through the annals of history, reminding us that the past is never as simple as it seems. You're up with the crack of dawn, stepping out into the cobblestone chaos of ancient Rome, a city that never really sleeps, much like you. As a gladiator trainer, or Lannister if we're getting all Latin about it, you've got a day ahead that's as predictable as a dice game. The air is thick with the smell of fresh bread, mingling with the less-than-pleasant aromas wafting from the Tiber River. But hey, that's all part of the Roman charm, right? Your morning commute isn't exactly a stroll through a peaceful park. It's more of a tactical maneuver through bustling markets and dodging the occasional runaway cart. This isn't just a walk, it's the first challenge of the day. And it's all leading to the Ludus, your gladiatorial playground, where the echoes of grunts and the clashing of wooden swords are the soundtrack to your life. You're not just a trainer, you're part accountant, part psychologist, and part miracle worker, trying to turn slaves and volunteers into the rock stars of the Roman amphitheater. Speaking of rock stars, let's talk finances, because, surprise, surprise, running a gladiator school isn't exactly the path to untold wealth. A decent gladiator can cost around 1,000 to 2,000 sesterces, which is quite the chunk of change when you consider that a soldier's annual salary was about 200 sesterces. So, each fighter is a significant investment. If they do well, they can make you a tidy profit. If they don't, well, you're left with an expensive pile of regrets. The economic stakes for you and your fellow Lannister are high. It's not just about buying a gladiator. It's about keeping them alive, healthy, and somewhat happy. You're shelling out for food, medical care, and training gear. Armor and weapons. Those aren't cheap either. A good set of armor might set you back another few hundred sesterces. And that's before you've even considered the cost of replacing it after a particularly enthusiastic training session. Not to mention, each piece of equipment has to fit perfectly. There's no off-the-rack option here. Now, let's deflate the myth of the glamorous gladiator life. Sure, they had their moments of glory in the arena, but day-to-day, it was about as glamorous as a Roman sewer. Training is brutal. It's relentless. Think CrossFit, but with fewer protein shakes and more life-or-death stakes. From dawn till dusk, your trainees are swinging heavy wooden swords, rudies, if you want the lingo, and practicing maneuvers that could save their lives or end them in front of a roaring crowd. The diet is another story. Forget the vision of a gladiator feasting on roasted peacock and vintage wine. Their diet is more akin to a modern endurance athlete's meal plan. Barley, beans, and the occasional hunk of meat make up their gladiator gruel, designed to bulk them up with the kind of muscle that can absorb a blow. Calcium was crucial too, so they down a concoction of vinegar and crude ash to keep their bones tough. Tasty, right? But why all this fuss over these fighters? Well, in a city where bread and circuses were the political tools of the day, gladiators were the circus. They were both entertainment and a reminder of Rome's power. Those who trained them, like you, played a pivotal role in maintaining this crucial part of Roman society. You were more than just a coach. You were a craftsman shaping the heroes and villains of the arena. As you finally reach the gates of the Ludus, the sun is climbing, casting long shadows that stretch across the training grounds. Inside, your charges are already hard at work, sweat glistening on their brows as they spar with each other, the rhythm of their movements choreographed by necessity and survival. For them, the arena is a stage and a battlefield, but for you, it's a business. Every move they make, every skill they master, is a step closer to keeping your school's reputation and your financials in the black. So, while the romantic notion of a gladiator's life may dazzle the modern imagination, your day-to-day reality is more about spreadsheets and sweat than spears and splendor. Forget the Hollywood gloss. This is a world where every decision, every investment, can mean the difference between triumph and tragedy. As the morning unfolds, you're reminded once again that in Rome, survival isn't just for the gladiators, it's for the trainers too. And so, as the morning sun casts its golden glow over the ludus, you're ready to dive headfirst into the gritty, no-holds-barred world of gladiator training. Let's get one thing straight right off the bat. This isn't your average day at the gym. There are no yoga mats or chilled eucalyptus towels here, just the raw, unfiltered struggle for survival. Picture your training grounds as a bustling hive of activity. You've got pairs of fighters running through combat drills, the air punctuated by the sharp crack of wooden swords meeting shields. Each swing isn't just practice. It's a rehearsal for life-or-death scenarios that might play out in the Colosseum. Sure, these drills might lack the drama of a Hollywood fight scene, but they are meticulously designed to hone reflexes and build endurance, because out there, hesitation can be fatal. Speaking of drills, let's talk about the gear. You've got your gladiators outfitted in heavy padding, which isn't exactly haute couture, but hey, it beats a gaping sword wound. This gear is essential for practicing the distinct styles each fighter embodies. You've got the Murmillo, with their fish-themed helmets and broad swords, the Threeks, wielding curved blades, and the Reschirius, armed with a trident and net. Each style has its own dance, its own choreography, and it's your job to ensure that every move is etched into muscle memory. Now, as you walk the dusty path between training pairs, you're not just watching bodies in motion, you're evaluating potential. You see the promise in a novice's footwork or the precision in a veteran's strike. Your role is part talent scout, part tactical mastermind. You need to match these attributes to the right opponents, because a mismatch in styles could mean a quick and costly end to your investment. The stakes are high, not just for the fighters, but for you too. Remember, a successful gladiator is more than just a survivor. They're a star, a celebrity of ancient Rome. And who doesn't love a good underdog story? If you can take a scrappy newcomer and turn them into a crowd favorite, you'll have patrons lining up to sponsor your ludus. But with great ambition comes the constant threat of failure. And in this cutthroat environment, a single misstep could see you replaced faster than you can say, Ave Caesar. Let's pause for a moment to consider the social dynamics swirling around you. The ludus isn't just a training ground, it's a microcosm of Roman society. You've got slaves, prisoners of war, and freeborn volunteers all thrown into the mix, each with their own reasons for stepping into the arena. Some are chasing glory, others are clawing for freedom, and a few are simply trying to escape their past. It's your job to navigate these complex relationships, to foster camaraderie while maintaining discipline. And then there are the patrons. Ah, the patrons. Those wealthy, influential Romans who sponsor your fighters. They're the ones with a vested interest in your success, and they're not shy about letting you know it. Picture a modern-day sports team owner, but with a toga and a penchant for blood sport. These aren't just benefactors. They're power players who expect results, and they're more than willing to apply pressure to ensure you deliver. The political dance you perform with them is just as intricate as any battle in the arena. But don't let the politics bog you down. The heart of your job, the soul of it really, is the training itself. You're not just molding bodies, you're shaping warriors, crafting legends. Each session is a step toward the next big game, the next opportunity to prove your mettle in front of thousands of roaring spectators. And make no mistake, those games are as much about strategy as they are about skill. As the day wears on, you're constantly adapting your plans. You're strategizing for upcoming matches, taking into account the strengths and weaknesses of both your fighters and their opponents. It's like a high-stakes game of chess, and every move counts. You can't afford to play favorites. Personal biases could cost you dearly. Instead, you evaluate based on performance, potential, and the ever-present need to keep the crowd entertained. Ah, the crowd. In many ways, they're the real masters of this bloody spectacle. The Roman public's appetite for entertainment is insatiable, and their tastes can be fickle. They want drama, they crave excitement, and they're always hungry for the next big thing. Your role is to ensure that your fighters deliver, to keep the masses cheering, and to maintain your reputation as a top-tier trainer. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the training grounds, you take a moment to reflect. You're not just a cog in the machine of Roman entertainment. You're a craftsman, an artist in your own right. You're part of a system that, for better or worse, holds a mirror to the society around it, reflecting both its glory and its brutality. And in a world where ambition can be both a blessing and a curse, you've learned to navigate the fine line between the two. So, as you wrap up another day, remember that the path of a Lannister is never straightforward. It's a constant balancing act, a dance between ambition and survival. But if you can master it, if you can rise above the challenges and deliver champions to the arena, then perhaps you'll carve out a place for yourself in the annals of history. After all, in Rome, the memory of glory is often as enduring as the glory itself. As you wrap up another day, remember that the path of a Lannister is never straightforward. It's a constant balancing act, a dance between ambition and survival. But if you can master it, if you can rise above the challenges and deliver champions to the arena, then perhaps you'll carve out a place for yourself in the annals of history. After all, in Rome, the memory of glory is often as enduring as the glory itself. Now let's take a deep breath and dive into the midday crescendo of Roman life, where the gladiatorial games reveal themselves as the grandest spectacle of political theater. Picture the Colosseum, an architectural marvel, seating up to 50,000 roaring Romans, each one a player in this vast social drama. These games aren't just about the blood and sand. They're the ultimate power play, where political ambition meets public entertainment. You see, in ancient Rome, throwing a gladiatorial game was like hosting the swankiest gala dinner and inviting everyone within 100-mile radius. Politicians, ever the opportunists, recognized these games as a golden ticket to the public's favor. And boy, did they cash in. Sponsoring a game wasn't just about demonstrating one's wealth. It was a calculated move to curry favor with the masses. Think of it as a blend of a modern election campaign mixed with a blockbuster film premiere, complete with all the pomp and circumstance of both. The cost of these spectacles? Staggering. We're talking upwards of 1 million sesterces for a top-tier event, which could bankroll a small legion. But the rewards were often worth every coin. A successful game could launch a political career into the stratosphere, or salvage one teetering on the edge of a metaphorical abyss. Julius Caesar himself, before he was the ruler of the known world, famously borrowed heavily to put on lavish games that left the populace chanting his name. It's not just about the politicians, though. The public's appetite for blood sport was insatiable, and the games were a social equalizer of sorts. Whether you were a senator's son or a common plebeian, your voice was part of the collective roar, your thumb was part of the verdict, life or death. The thrill of the arena was a visceral experience, one that united the city in its shared hunger for spectacle. The games were the Roman answer to Netflix, where the latest plot twist could be a real-life duel to the death. But let's pop the bubble of noble combat here. The romantic image of the gladiator as a brave warrior, fighting for honor and glory, is mostly a modern invention. For the fighters, it was less about valor and more about survival. The arena was a meat grinder, and the Lannister, your comrades in profession, were the ones feeding it. Sure, a gladiator might earn his freedom after a series of victories, but more often than not, he was just another expendable asset in a brutal business. Now, let's talk about the stars of this grim parade, the gladiators themselves. Their lives were a paradox of adulation and exploitation. On one hand, they were revered, their names chanted by the crowds, their likenesses painted on walls. On the other, they were commodities, traded like livestock, their fates determined by the whims of their owners and the punters in the stands. For every fighter who earned his freedom, countless others perished, their bodies discarded as casually as the trash after the games. And what of the trainers, the Lannister like you? Well, you were the unsung architects of this spectacle. Your job was to transform raw recruits into seasoned fighters, to mold them into the perfect blend of athlete and performer. You were part coach, part manager, and part ringmaster in this circus of death. The pressure was immense, the stakes high. Every match was a test of your skill, your judgment, and your ability to read the crowd's fickle desires. The games, for all their brutality, were a reflection of Roman society itself, complex, hierarchical, and driven by an insatiable lust for power and prestige. They were a tool of social control, a way to placate the masses and distract them from the inequities of daily life. Bread and circuses, as the saying goes. And within this dynamic, you played a crucial role, a cog in the vast machinery of Roman entertainment. Yet, even as you navigate the intricacies of this world, there's a strange beauty to be found in the chaos. The strategy, the spectacle, the sheer human drama of it all. Each game day is a new chapter, a new opportunity to leave your mark on history. And while the outcome may be uncertain, the journey itself is a testament to the enduring power of ambition and resilience. As the midday sun blazes overhead, casting sharp shadows across the Colosseum, you know that the games are more than just a pastime. They are a testament to the heights and the depths of human nature, a reminder that in Rome, as in life, the line between glory and ruin is razor thin. Yet within that precarious balance lies the potential for greatness, for those bold enough to seize it. So, as you prepare for the next bout, remember this. In the arena of life, as in the Colosseum, it's not just about the fight, it's about the story. And every fighter, every trainer, is part of a larger narrative that stretches back through the ages, capturing the imagination of generations. You, my friend, are both a player and a storyteller in this grand saga. And the tale you weave could be the one that echoes through the annals of time. With the afternoon sun casting long shadows, you are reminded once again of the fragile nature of the world you inhabit. The games are a reflection of society's darkest desires, a mirror held up to a culture that glorifies strength and domination. They are a reminder that, for all the pomp and circumstance, life in ancient Rome was a precarious dance between power and survival. And in this dance, you are both participant and observer, navigating the shifting tides of fortune with every step you take. As the afternoon sun dips lower, casting a golden hue over the bustling streets of Rome, it's time to tackle the less glamorous side of your Lannister life, the logistics. The gritty, underappreciated backbone of any successful gladiatorial event. If you thought it was all swords and sandals, think again. This is where the true challenge lies, my friend. Welcome to the world of permits, payments, and people management. Let's dive in. First up, let's consider the venue. The Colosseum might be the crown jewel of Roman amphitheaters, but it's not the only game in town. There are plenty of smaller venues scattered across the city, each with its own set of quirks and costs. Renting arena space isn't just about having it available on the day you need it. Oh no, it's an intricate dance with city officials and venue owners. Picture it as trying to book Madison Square Garden for a rock concert, but with more togas and fewer roadies. Depending on the size and prestige, renting could set you back anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 sesterces. Compare that to the average Roman citizen's annual income of about 900 sesterces, and you get the picture. This isn't cheap real estate. Now let's talk paperwork. You think modern bureaucracy is a headache? Try navigating the Roman permit system. You'll need to secure the proper permissions from local magistrates, who are more than happy to remind you of their importance. Bribery, gifts to expedite the process can't be overlooked. We're talking about a few hundred sesterces here and there to keep the wheels greased. Hey, when in Rome, right? With the arena booked and the permits in hand, it's time to rally your crew. You've got a motley team of slaves and hired workers, each with their own role in building the spectacle. From setting up the arena to managing the equipment, this isn't just grunt work. It's a carefully orchestrated operation. And like any good project manager, you need to keep them motivated. Sure, you could crack the whip, but why not throw in a little incentive, such as an extra ration of grain or a promise of future manumission? It's a delicate balance between carrot and stick that would make any corporate manager proud. Let's not forget the marketing. In a city where entertainment options are as plentiful as wine at a Bacchus festival, you need to stand out. Posters are plastered across the city, painted with vibrant colors and brimming with promises of the fiercest battles and most daring feats. You might even hire criers to roam the streets, shouting out the details of your event, ensuring that every Roman citizen knows where to be when the games begin. Think of it as a blend of social media marketing and old-school word of mouth, just without the hashtags. The rivalry. Among trainers, the competition is fierce. It's not just about who has the most skilled fighters. It's about who can draw the biggest crowds and win the favor of the city's elite. You're constantly on the lookout for talent, hoping to discover the next big gladiatorial sensation. If you can turn a nobody into a household name, you'll not only boost your school's reputation, but also your bottom line. It's a bit like the cutthroat world of sports agents today, minus the luxury boxes and endorsement deals, of course. But let's burst the bubble of gladiator glory here. The reality is, not every fighter can be a star. For every Spartacus, there are dozens who never make it past their first fight. And for you, each fighter lost isn't just a personal failure, it's a financial one. So you study their techniques, their quirks, plotting strategies that play to their strengths. Your ability to match your fighters against the right opponents can mean the difference between a triumphant return and a costly loss. And don't forget the social dynamics at play. Your fighters hail from all walks of life, captured prisoners, slaves, and volunteers chasing glory or a better life. Managing this diverse group requires a keen understanding of human nature and a knack for diplomacy that would make a seasoned politician sweat. You're more than just their trainer. You're their mentor, their confidant, and sometimes their only ally in a world that sees them as expendable. As you juggle these logistical challenges, you're acutely aware that the stakes extend beyond the arena. In Rome, success is measured in power and prestige, and the games are a microcosm of this relentless pursuit. The political machinations that underpin the gladiatorial world are as complex as any Senate debate, and you must navigate them with care. Patronage from influential citizens can make or break your career, and every decision you make is a step on the tightrope between favor and failure. And so, as the sun sets on another day, you prepare for the final push before the games begin. The thrill of anticipation is tempered by the knowledge that the path to glory is paved with the bones of those who came before. But in this world of blood and sand, you've learned that the greatest victories aren't always won in the arena. They're forged in the fires of ambition and tempered by the resolve to rise above the challenges that lie ahead. As the sun finally dips below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, it's time to turn your thoughts to the legacy of the world you've been immersed in. A day spent in the gladiatorial grind might leave you exhausted, but it also offers the perfect moment to ponder over the broader impact of these bloody spectacles on Roman culture. After all, these games were more than mere entertainment. They were a reflection of Roman society's thirst for power, control, and oddly enough, unity. Let's start by debunking the grandiose myth surrounding the gladiators themselves. The timeless image of the noble gladiator, fighting for freedom and glory, has persisted through the ages, thanks perhaps to Hollywood's penchant for drama. But let's face it, the reality didn't quite match the cinematic flair. Gladiators were often slaves or condemned criminals, their fates sealed by the whims of the spectators. Sure, a few became legends, like the iconic Spartacus, led a slave revolt that shook the Roman Republic to its core in 73 BC. But for every Spartacus, there were thousands more who met their end anonymously in the arena, their dreams of freedom as elusive as a mirage in the desert. Still, the allure of the gladiator remains, even today. Why? Well, there's something undeniably compelling about the underdog story, the idea of a man rising against the odds. It's a narrative that resonates across cultures and generations, despite its often grim reality. The romantic appeal of the gladiator is a testament to our own fascination with the struggle for survival, the thrill of combat, and the hope for redemption. It's a narrative that speaks to the heart, even if history tells a harsher tale. Now, let's zoom out and look at the broader stroke of politics and society. Gladiatorial games were not just about the combatants. They were a political tool wielded with precision. In a society where political power was as volatile as a Roman chariot race, these games offered a way to win the hearts of the populace. Politicians seeking office or favor would sponsor lavish spectacles, spending fortunes in the hopes of securing public approval. It was a calculated risk, akin to a modern-day campaign trail, where the cost of a successful series of games could easily soar into the hundreds of thousands of sesterces. But the return on investment, potentially priceless political capital. This wasn't just about personal gain, though. The games also served a critical social function, acting as a pressure valve for the restless masses. In a city bustling with over 1 million people, many of whom were impoverished and disenfranchised, the promise of free bread and entertainment was a powerful pacifier. Bread and circuses, as the saying goes, were the means by which the Roman elite kept the populace content, distracting them from the stark inequalities of daily life. It's a sobering reminder that the games were as much about social control as they were about spectacle. As the evening breeze cools the air, you can't help but reflect on the ethical quandaries posed by this ancient spectacle. The Romans were a people who valued honor and virtue, yet they reveled in the bloodshed of the arena. It's a contradiction that underscores the complexity of human nature, our capacity for both empathy and cruelty. The games were a celebration of martial prowess, a tribute to the values of courage and strength that defined Roman identity. Yet they also exposed the darker side of that identity, the willingness to dehumanize others for entertainment. There's a lesson in that contradiction, one that resonates even today. The legacy of the gladiatorial games is a mirror reflecting our own societal values, our fascination with violence and competition, our hunger for heroes and villains. It's a legacy that challenges us to consider the ethical implications of our own entertainment choices, to question the fine line between admiration and exploitation. As you wrap up your day, the weight of these reflections is a reminder of the world you inhabit. The gladiatorial games were more than just a sport. They were a microcosm of Roman life, a lens through which we can examine the intricacies of power, politics, and human nature. They were a stage upon which the drama of ambition and survival played out, with you, the Lannister, as both participant and observer. So, as you close the gates of the Ludus and head home beneath the starry Roman sky, take a moment to appreciate the role you play in this vast, intricate tapestry. You are a custodian of history, a keeper of stories that have echoed through the ages. In the arena of life, as in the Colosseum, the battles we fight are both personal and universal, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. And there you have it, the day in the life of a gladiator trainer, a mix of grit, glory, and introspection that leaves you pondering not just the legacy of Rome, but the echoes of history that shape our world today. So next time you find yourself captivated by the tales of ancient combat, remember that the real story is as complex as the society that created it. In the end, the legacy of the gladiators is a story of survival, a reminder that history is not just about the past, but about the enduring human quest for meaning and significance. You wake up in the cradle of Western civilization, where the sun spills over the rugged hills of Athens, casting long shadows on the ancient stones. Today, you're taking a stroll through history's architectural wonderland, the Acropolis. It's a place that whispers stories of gods and mortals, marble and sweat, politics and pocketbooks. But let's not get too romantic just yet. You're here to uncover the gritty realities behind these iconic structures, starting with the Parthenon, that marble behemoth perched majestically atop the hill. As you ascend the Acropolis, take a moment to let the grandeur sink in. Built between 447 and 432 BCE, the Parthenon is the rock star of ancient Greek architecture. But unlike your typical rock star, it wasn't built on a whim or a wild night out. No, it was the product of strategic political maneuvering and a hefty investment, the ancient equivalent of a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project. It cost around 5,000 talents, enough to make even the most spendthrift Athenian gulp. For context, one talent could pay a skilled worker for about 9 years. Imagine trying to justify that in a city council meeting today. The mastermind behind this architectural feat was none other than Pericles, Athens' top dog and master of optics. He had a vision, and like any good politician, he knew how to sell it. The Acropolis was to be a symbol of Athenian glory, a beacon of culture, power, and let's be real, a little bit of intimidation for anyone sailing into the Piraeus harbor. But this wasn't just Pericles' vanity project. It was a calculated move to solidify Athens' supremacy following the Persian Wars. Now, here's where we debunk some myths. You might have heard that these grand structures were the result of a unified democratic effort, the people of Athens coming together to create something beautiful. Well, yes and no. The funding came from the Delian League's coffers, essentially a mutual defense fund for Greek city-states. Translation: Athens was dipping into a communal pot to fund its bling. It was a bit like your roommate using the joint grocery fund to buy a new TV. Not quite the democratic utopia the pamphlets promised. As you continue your tour, marvel at the columns, the epitome of Doric perfection. They aren't just there to hold things up, they're a testament to human ingenuity. Each of the Parthenon's columns stands 4 meters tall, and is composed of several drums, precisely cut and stacked with an almost obsessive attention to detail. These columns were crafted by a small army of skilled workers. artisans who knew their tools like the back of their hands. Forget the romantic notion of muscle-bound slaves toiling under a hot sun. These were experts, meticulously chiseling Pentelic marble sourced from the quarries of Mount Pentelicus, about 16 kilometers away. Parthenon wasn't slapped together in a few months. This was a well-oiled machine of a project, employing hundreds, if not thousands, of laborers over its 15-year construction period. And yes, they were paid for their efforts. Yet another myth busted about ancient economies. These workers were the unsung heroes, the ones who made Pericle's vision a tangible reality. They were the software engineers of their day, translating abstract plans into concrete form, or in this case, marble. Pausing to take in the view of Athens sprawling below, you can almost hear the clamor of ancient life, a city bustling with trade, debate, and the relentless pursuit of progress. It's easy to forget that this was a society rife with political intrigue and economic maneuvering. The construction of the Acropolis wasn't just about art or religion. It was a statement of power and prosperity, a bold advertisement for Athenian dominance in the Greek world. As your day on the Acropolis draws closer to the afternoon, remember that this was a project that came with its share of controversy. Pericles faced his critics, those who balked at the costs and the audacity of using Delian League funds. Yet, in a brilliant twist of political theater, Pericles argued that the Parthenon was a gift to Athena and thus a gift to the city itself. It's the kind of spin that would make any modern PR firm proud. With the sun now high in the sky, casting an ethereal glow on the Parthenon's ancient stones, you can appreciate the sheer audacity of its builders. The Parthenon isn't just a relic. It's a testament to human ambition, the eternal dance between vision and reality. It's the stone-cold evidence of a society that dared to dream big, grappled with its own contradictions, and left behind a legacy that continues to captivate the world. As you descend the Acropolis, leaving behind the soaring columns and the echoes of the past, you're reminded that this iconic site is more than just an architectural marvel. It's a window into a world where politics and art, ambition and reality, intertwine to create something truly extraordinary. And while the myths are alluring, the real story, the one etched in stone and human effort, is far more compelling. As you leave the Acropolis, you plunge into the beating heart of Athens, the Agora. This isn't just any old marketplace. It's the original hub of hustle and bustle, where democracy, philosophy, and commerce collided in a glorious cacophony. Picture it as the ancient world's answer to Times Square, minus the neon lights and pretzels. Here, every stone whispers tales of bargains struck, political debates, and the occasional philosophical revelation. Now, let's burst a bubble or two. The Agora might evoke images of idyllic public gatherings, where Socrates himself could be found waxing philosophical about the meaning of life. But reality check. It was more like a busy street market on steroids. The Agora was a sprawling plaza, filled with everything from food stalls and workshops to temples and government buildings, all strategically positioned to maximize foot traffic and facilitate trade. We're talking about a place where you could buy a loaf of bread, attend a court hearing, and catch the latest political drama, all before lunch. Let's dive into the nuts and bolts of this ancient epicenter. The Agora was roughly 200 meters wide and 170 meters long, a space large enough to accommodate the vibrant chaos of Athenian life. But the Agora wasn't just about size. It was about location, location, location. Situated at the crossroads of trade routes, it was the beating heart of commerce, where goods from across the Mediterranean found eager buyers. Merchant ships docking at Piraeus, Athens' bustling port, would unload their wares, which then made their way to the Agora. From olive oil and wine to pottery and textiles, the Agora was the ultimate ancient shopping mall. But here's where it gets interesting. The Agora wasn't just a commercial hub. It was a stage for social stratification. Not everyone enjoyed the Agora equally. While it was a playground for the city's elite to flaunt their wealth and influence, the lower classes found themselves relegated to the fringes. This was a place where social hierarchies were as visible as the Parthenon in the distance. The well-heeled strolled through colonnades, discussing politics and philosophy, while the less fortunate hustled for a day's wage, perhaps selling their handmade wares or laboring in one of the many workshops. Yet, amid this social tapestry, the architecture of the Agora stood as a testament to the Athenians' pragmatic genius. Take the Stoa of Attalos, for instance, a marvel of multipurpose design. This grand colonnade stretched 116 meters long, providing shade and shelter from the Mediterranean sun. It was a place where merchants peddled their goods, philosophers debated, and citizens sought respite from the hustle. The Stoa was a concrete, or should we say marble, example of how architecture served both practical and social functions. And speaking of practicality, the Tholos, a circular building within the agora, was where the city's council met. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a town hall, but with a twist. This wasn't just a place for bureaucratic bickering. It was a hub of decision-making that shaped the lives of Athenians. Here, the council dined together and even slept in shifts to ensure that governance never took a day off. Talk about dedication to the cause. Now, let's not forget the Temple of Hephaestus, which loomed over the agora like a silent sentinel. Built around 449 BCE, this temple honored the god of craftsmanship and fire, an apt patron for a city that prized innovation and industry. And here's a fun fact. It's one of the best preserved ancient temples in Greece, which means it's still standing to remind us of its enduring legacy. But let's take a moment to bust another myth. The agora wasn't just a harmonious blend of trade and philosophy. It was also a hotbed of political machinations and power plays. In fact, it was in the agora that ostracism took place, a practice where citizens could vote to exile a political figure they deemed too powerful or dangerous. Imagine that, a democratic mechanism that allowed the people to literally vote someone off the island. Survivor, Ancient Athens edition, anyone. As you wander through the agora, it's easy to see how its architecture was more than just stone and mortar. It was a living, breathing entity, reflecting the dynamic interplay of commerce, politics, and society. The agora was where ideas met action, where the lofty ideals of democracy were put to the test in the crucible of daily life. Yet, amid all this grandeur, it's crucial to remember the people who animated this space. The agora wasn't just for the elite or the philosophers. It was a microcosm of Athenian society, where the voices of artisans, traders, and everyday citizens mingled with those of politicians and thinkers. It was a place where fortunes were made and lost, where reputations were built and shattered. So, as you leave the agora, with its echoes of ancient life still reverberating in your ears, remember that this was a place of contradictions. It was a space where the ideal and the real collided, where the messy business of living unfolded in all its complexity. The agora is a reminder that history is not just a series of grand narratives and monumental structures. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of countless lives, each with its own story to tell. And with that, we leave the agora behind, but our journey through ancient Athens is far from over. The city awaits with more stories, more myths to unravel, and more realities to confront. So, stay tuned as we continue to peel back the layers of history, one stone at a time. As you leave the bustling chaos of the agora behind, your journey through ancient Athens takes a turn away from the grand and the glorious toward the streets where everyday life unfolded, far from the marble splendor of the Parthenon or the intellectual debates of the agora. Welcome to a typical Athenian neighborhood, where the architecture is less about wowing the guards and more about keeping the rain out and the family in. Here, you won't find towering columns or grand facades, but rather a landscape of modest homes, a testament to the unvarnished reality of ancient Greek life. Let's start with the basics, materials. Forget the gleaming marble of the Acropolis. Down here, it's all about mud brick and wood. The typical Athenian house was a simple affair, built with sun-dried mud bricks and wooden beams, with a roof of clay tiles. Not exactly the stuff of architectural legends, but practical and cost-effective. These materials were abundant and cheap, which was perfect for a society where the average citizen wasn't exactly rolling in drachmas. Now, let's talk dimensions. If you're imagining sprawling villas with manicured gardens, you might want to adjust your mental image. The typical house in Athens was modestly sized, often no larger than 200 square meters, and usually crammed into narrow streets. And when I say narrow, I mean narrow, barely wide enough for a donkey to pass through without knocking over someone's laundry. These weren't homes designed for luxury. They were built to fit the needs of a working family. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of your starter home, with a bit more dust. Inside, the layout was practical, if not exactly spacious. Most homes were organized around a central courtyard, the heart of domestic life. This courtyard, was where you'd find the women of the house spinning wool or chatting with neighbors, while the men were out doing whatever it was that ancient Greek men did when they weren't philosophizing or voting for ostracism. Rooms were small and multifunctional. The same space might serve as a dining room by day and a bedroom by night, with furniture that could be easily moved or repurposed. And speaking of furniture, let's bust another myth. The ancient Greeks weren't lounging on plush sofas or dining at mahogany tables. A typical household had sparse furnishings. Think wooden stools, simple tables, and perhaps a few chests for storage. Comfort was not the primary concern. Functionality was. And while we're on the topic of furniture, it's worth noting that most of it was handcrafted by local artisans, testament to the skill and resourcefulness of Athenian craftsmen. Now, let's dig into the social and economic implications of this modest domestic life. The simplicity of these homes wasn't just about economy. It was a reflection of societal norms. Austerity was a virtue in ancient Greek society, and ostentatious displays of wealth were frowned upon. Even the wealthier citizens maintained relatively modest homes, preferring to showcase their status through public works, patronage, and contributions to communal projects like, you guessed it, the Parthenon. In a way, the home was a private retreat, not a public statement. The real competition was in the agora, where civic contributions spoke louder than golden doorknobs. Despite their modesty, these homes were the backdrop for vibrant community life. Neighbors lived in close quarters, sharing walls and sometimes even courtyards. This proximity fostered a strong sense of community, with social interactions happening organically on a daily basis. From borrowing a cup of olive oil to sharing news of the latest political scandal, life in a typical Athenian neighborhood was anything but isolated. It was a living, breathing network of relationships, where everyone knew everyone else's business, sometimes a little too well. But let's not romanticize it too much. These neighborhoods, while communal, were also places where societal tensions played out. Class divisions were evident, as the wealthier citizens lived in slightly larger homes with more amenities, like a second story or a private bath. Meanwhile, the poorer citizens made do with the bare essentials, often squeezed into single-room dwellings. It was a microcosm of Athenian society, where the ideals of democracy clashed with the realities of economic inequality. And speaking of inequality, let's not forget the women of ancient Athens, whose lives were largely confined to the domestic sphere. They were the unsung managers of these households, overseeing everything from food preparation to textile production. While the men were out making political decisions in the agora, the women were the ones keeping the home fires burning, literally. Yet, despite their crucial role, they had little say in public life, a stark reminder of the gender dynamics that underpinned Athenian society. As you wander through these ancient neighborhoods, it's easy to see how the architecture of the home was more than just walls and roofs. It was a reflection of societal values, economic realities, and social structures. The homes of Athens were modest, yes, but they were also resilient, adaptable, and deeply connected to the rhythms of daily life. And so, as the sun begins to set over the Athenian skyline, casting long shadows on the mud brick walls, you're left with a deeper understanding of the contrast between public grandeur and private simplicity. It's a reminder that while the ancient Greeks may have built monuments to impress the gods, their true legacy lies in the humble homes that sheltered the lives of everyday citizens. As we leave this neighborhood behind, we'll continue to unravel the stories of ancient Athens, where history is as much about the people as it is about the stones they left behind. Stay tuned for more as we delve deeper into the heart of this fascinating city. As we wander away from the humble homes of Athens, it's time to pivot from the mundane everyday life to the divine. Well, at least the structures dedicated to the divine. You've ogled the Parthenon, but let's face it, Athens wasn't just a one-temple town. Beyond the marble splendor dedicated to Athena, there's a whole pantheon of deities, each with their own architectural shrines that tell a different story of Greek religion and culture. Take, for instance, the Temple of Hephaestus, which you might remember from our stroll through the agora. This temple is like the reliable sidekick in a buddy movie, often overlooked but crucial to the plot. Built around 449 BCE, it's dedicated to the god of craftsmanship and fire, a fitting patron for a city that prided itself on its artistry and industrious spirit. Unlike the Parthenon, which was all about showbiz, the Temple of Hephaestus was more workmanlike, with its sturdy Doric columns and no-nonsense design. It's the kind of place where you imagine Hephaestus himself might have kicked back after a long day of forging thunderbolts for Zeus. The Doric order, with its simple, sturdy columns and plain capitals, was the architectural equivalent of a good, dependable pair of jeans. Practical, no frills, and timelessly cool. While the Parthenon flaunts this style to perfection, the Temple of Hephaestus shows it off in a more understated, yet equally charming manner. And let's not forget, this is one of the best preserved temples from ancient Greece, standing as a testament to the long-lasting appeal of the Doric style. It's the Greek architecture equivalent of the little black dress, never out of style. But let's not put all our eggs in the Doric basket. The Greeks had more than one trick up their architectural sleeves. Enter the Ionic order, the Doric's more sophisticated cousin. If the Doric is your trusty pair of jeans, the Ionic is your tailored suit, elegant, refined, and just a bit fancier. Think of the Temple of Athena Nike, perched like a jewel box on the Acropolis, with its slender Ionic columns and scroll-like volutes. Built around 420 BCE, it's a tribute to Athena in her aspect as the goddess of victory, a fitting dedication for a city that loved a good military triumph. Ionic columns are the kind of thing that make you say, wow, those Greeks really knew how to put on a show. They're more slender and ornate, the architectural equivalent of a well-crafted area. And if you think the Greeks stopped there, well, you're in for a surprise. Enter the Corinthian order, the flamboyant cousin who shows up to every family reunion in a glittering outfit, ready to steal the spotlight. The Corinthian order was the last of the three classical orders to be developed and was all about the drama. Think elaborate capitals adorned with acanthus leaves and an overall sense of, look at me, I'm fabulous. While less common in mainland Greece, it found a home in places like the Temple of Olympian Zeus in Athens, which, although started in the 6th century BCE, wasn't completed until the Roman Emperor Hadrian came along in the 2nd century CE. Talk about a long construction project. The Corinthian columns here are like the architectural equivalent of a rock star, over the top, commanding attention and leaving an indelible mark. Now, let's zoom out and look at the broader picture. These architectural styles weren't just about aesthetic preferences. They were deeply tied to local identities and regional pride. Each city-state, or polis, had its own favored style, reflecting its cultural values and aspirations. In a way, these temples were like ancient billboards, advertising the power, sophistication, and artistic sensibilities of their respective communities. Take, for instance, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, nestled in the mountains of central Greece. This sanctuary was renowned throughout the Greek world as the home of the Oracle of Delphi, a spiritual heartline to the gods. The temple itself, with its Doric columns and commanding position overlooking the valley, was a statement of Delphi's spiritual authority and its role as a center of Greek religion. Pilgrims from across the Greek world would journey here, bringing offerings and seeking guidance, which in turn brought economic and political clout to the Delphians. But here's the kicker. The temple we see today isn't even the first one to stand on this site. It's like a spiritual reboot, version 3.0, if you will. The original was destroyed in a fire, and the second collapsed in an earthquake. The third, built in the 4th century BCE, was a testament to perseverance and the Greeks' penchant for rebuilding bigger and better. It's a reminder that even in the world of gods and marble, nothing is truly permanent. And speaking of regional pride, let's not forget the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Located in what is now Turkey, this temple was a blinding display of wealth and grandeur, built to house the cult statue of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. With its massive Ionic columns, some 18 meters tall, it was less about subtlety and more about making jaws drop. Ephesus was saying, we're not just a Greek colony, we're the place to be. But here's where it gets juicy. The temple was burned down by a man named Herostratus who, in a bid for eternal fame, set it alight in 356 BCE. His name was immortalized, but not in the way he hoped. It became synonymous with a person who commits a crime for notoriety. And the Ephesians, they rebuilt the temple, bigger and better, proving once again that the real art form in ancient Greece was resilience. So, what do we take away from this architectural tour de force? The temples of ancient Greece weren't just places of worship. They were declarations of identity, resilience, and ambition. Each style, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, was a brushstroke on the canvas of Greek culture, each temple a testament to the interplay of local pride and pan-Hellenic identity. As we wrap up this leg of our journey, remember that each of these temples, from the understated Doric to the flamboyant Corinthian, has a story to tell. They are the architectural echoes of a civilization that dared to dream big, to build boldly, and to leave behind a legacy that still captivates us today. And while the myths may paint a picture of divine intervention and artistic genius, the reality is a bit more grounded, an eternal dance between human ambition and the whims of fate. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the stories of ancient Greece, where the stones speak as loudly as the legends they've inspired. As we continue this architectural odyssey, it's time to ponder the colossal shadow these ancient stones cast over our modern world. If you've ever strolled past a government building, you might have noticed a certain familiarity, columns that seem to echo the whispers of the Parthenon or the Temple of Hephaestus. That's no accident. Ancient Greek architecture is the style that keeps on giving, like the friend who insists on picking up the tab even when you're sure it's your turn. Take the United States Capitol, for instance. Its neoclassical facade is a love letter to Greek ideals, a grand nod to democracy with a splash of Ionic flair. Those columns aren't just holding up a roof, they're holding up an idea, that governance should reflect beauty and order, much like the Greeks envisioned. But let's not kid ourselves. The Greeks weren't all about democracy and beauty. Their architectural feats were also about power and showing off, a tradition we've kept alive with every marble-clad skyscraper and grandiose courthouse. And speaking of showing off, let's not overlook the myth of the solitary genius architect. We love the idea of a singular visionary, a Pericles or a Phidias, bending the world to their will. But the reality is, these projects were the result of collective sweat and collaboration. The Parthenon wasn't a one-man show. It was a blockbuster production with a cast of thousands. The architects Ictinos and Callicrates were more like directors orchestrating a vast crew of artisans and laborers, each playing their part to perfection. But here's the kicker. While we gush over the aesthetics, the real legacy lies in the principles, those foundational ideas that still underpin our understanding of architecture today. The Greeks were obsessed with balance and proportion, the harmony between parts and the whole. Their golden ratio, a divine mathematical principle, still guides everything from Renaissance art to your smartphone's screen layout. That's right, your Instagram feed owes a debt to ancient Greece. Who knew those selfies had a classical pedigree? Yet, as much as we idolize the Greeks, we can't ignore the contradictions. They were masters of innovation, yet staunchly traditional. The same society that gifted us with the Parthenon also saw the rise of Sparta, a city-state with architecture so austere it makes minimalism look like Rococo. The Spartans, not to be outdone by their Athenian rivals, focused on military might rather than marble grandeur. Their legacy is less about buildings and more about an ethos of discipline and resilience, which is just as influential in modern times, albeit in a different way. Let's not forget the economic engine driving this architectural boom. The construction of these grand edifices was expensive, eye-wateringly so. The Parthenon alone cost around 5,000 talents, an amount that still makes accountants break into a cold sweat. But the Athenians saw this as an investment in their city's prestige. Today's equivalent might be the space race or the tech industry, areas where money flows not just for profit, but for the glory and advancement of society. But let's pivot from dollars and drachmas to philosophy and aesthetics. The Greeks didn't just build to impress the gods or intimidate their neighbors. They built to explore the fundamental question of beauty. For them, beauty was a reflection of truth and goodness, an idea that continues to resonate. Think of the modern architectural wonders we admire today, like the Sydney Opera House or the Guggenheim Museum. They challenge our notions of form and function, just as Greek temples did millennia ago. Yet, in our reverence, we often gloss over the less romantic aspects. The construction of these marvels was back-breaking work, undertaken by a mix of skilled laborers and, yes, enslaved individuals. While the myth paints a picture of a society united in its pursuits, the reality was far more complex. Economic inequality, social stratification, and political intrigue were as much a part of the landscape as the marble and the mortar. And speaking of myths, let's tackle the notion of Greek architecture as the pinnacle of artistic achievement. Sure, the Greeks laid the groundwork, but every era since has built upon it, adding layers of innovation and reinterpretation. The Romans, for example, took Greek principles and supercharged them with concrete and engineering prowess, giving us the Colosseum and the Pantheon. In a way, each generation has been a steward of the Greek legacy, adapting it to suit its own needs and ambitions. So, as we wrap up our day in ancient Greece, basking in the afterglow of Doric columns and Ionic scrolls, what do we take away? The legacy of Greek architecture is not just in the stones left behind, but in the enduring ideas they encapsulate, ideas about beauty, democracy, and human potential. These structures are monuments not just to the gods, but to the human spirit's ability to dream, to build, and to leave a mark on the world. In the end, the story of Greek architecture is the story of humanity itself, a tapestry of ambition and contradiction, innovation and tradition, etched in stone and still echoing through the ages. So next time you walk past a neoclassical building or admire the symmetry of a modern design, remember you're not just looking at architecture. You're gazing into the soul of a civilization that dared to imagine the impossible and then built it. And while the myths may continue to enchant, it's the gritty, glorious reality that truly captivates. As we step away from the echoes of the past, let's carry forward the lessons and the legacy, remembering that every building tells a story, and every story is worth telling. You're standing on the banks of the mighty Nile, the longest river in the world, which is about as close to a god as any body of water can get. It's the lifeline of ancient Egypt, a massive blue artery pumping life into the heart of a civilization. But here's the kicker. The Nile isn't just a pretty river. It's a fickle beast that floods annually, and those floods are as predictable as the weather in a rom-com. Sometimes they save the day, and sometimes they're a total disaster. By now, you've probably noticed that the Nile doesn't just flood when it feels like it. Oh no, it's got a schedule. We're talking mid-July to October, the inundation season, or akit, as you'd call it if you were sporting a stylish linen kilt and speaking ancient Egyptian. The Nile's floodwaters turn the dry, cracked earth into a fertile paradise, which means food aplenty if you play your cards right. But if the flood's too high or too low, you're in for a year of either soggy sandals or empty bellies. Enter the ancient Egyptian weathermen, the priests. Instead of green screens and satellite images, they've got the night sky and a trusty star to help them out. Sirius, the dog star, makes its annual debut in the pre-dawn sky around the same time as the flood. Coincidence? The Egyptians didn't think so. To them, Sirius was like a celestial alarm clock, and when it beeped, it was time to start bracing for the waters. But how did these desert-dwelling wizards manage to keep track of all this celestial gaming? Astronomy, my friends. They were like ancient Neil deGrasse Tysons, minus the Twitter account. They had observed the stars with such precision that they could predict the Nile's flooding with surprising accuracy, which was no small feat back in the day when mistaking a star for a UFO was likely a much more common occurrence. Now, let's not forget the Nileometer, a device that's as much fun to say as it is to use. This clever contraption, which sounds like something out of a steampunk novel, was an ancient tool for measuring the Nile's water level. Picture a staircase descending into the river or a stone column with calibrations. When the water rose, so did the markings. If the water hit the sweet spot on the Nileometer, it was time to party. Too high or too low, and you might start considering a career change to desert hermit. This blend of science and faith paints a fascinating picture. The priests, with their sky-gazing and water-measuring antics, were not just spiritual guides. They were the meteorologists and hydrologists of their time. Their ability to predict the floods was crucial because it meant the difference between a bountiful harvest and an empty granary. In a world without Netflix, that's about as dramatic as it gets. Let's face it, the Nile was both a blessing and a curse. It was the reason why Egypt thrived, yet it was also a moody diva that needed constant attention. The Egyptians turned this unpredictable force of nature into their greatest ally through a mix of clever observation and religious reverence. Now, before you start thinking that these ancient Egyptians were all about science and no fun, let's debunk that myth right now. Sure, they used Sirius and Nileometers, but they also had a pantheon of gods to appease. Happy gods meant happy floods, or so they believed. This is where the priests really shone. Imagine a cross between a scientist, a politician, and a Broadway actor. They were the ultimate influencers, persuading both the gods and the people that they knew exactly what was going on. But let's not kid ourselves. The Nile's annual floods were less like clockwork and more like a high-stakes gamble. You had to be smart, you had to be lucky, and sometimes you had to be both. The Egyptians, with their keen eyes on the stars and their feet in the mud, managed to turn this uncertainty into a civilization that lasted for thousands of years. Not bad for a bunch of people who didn't even have the wheel until way later. So there you have it. The Nile, Sirius, Nilometers, and a healthy dose of divine intervention. A recipe for survival in ancient Egypt, and a reminder that sometimes living on the edge of disaster is exactly where you find your strength. Now, speaking of living on the edge, let's dive into how the Egyptians turned the Nile's unpredictable deluge into a well-rehearsed agricultural opera. When the Nile played its watery tune, the Egyptians didn't just let it crash wherever it pleased like a toddler with a full juice box. No, they orchestrated an elaborate system of canals and basins, transforming potential chaos into a symphony of productivity. Here's the scene. The Nile floods, and instead of just letting all that water run wild, the Egyptians had the foresight to channel it through a network of canals. Imagine it as an ancient version of urban planning, but with a lot more mud and considerably fewer coffee shops. These canals weren't just ditches dug on a whim. They were engineered with precision, and their construction was as much an art as it was a science, using tools like shadows. Those long, counterweighted poles that look like primitive cranes. They lifted water from the river into the canals and basins. Think of a seesaw, but instead of kids, it's water doing the heavy lifting. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the romance of irrigation. Building these canals was tough, back-breaking work, an ancient workout regimen that involved a whole lot more than a few squats and stretches. You see, this wasn't just a couple of people with shovels. It was a massive labor operation. The government, or the pharaoh's administration, if we're being precise, organized vast armies of workers. These weren't slaves, by the way. They were often conscripted farmers and laborers, part of a corvée system. This was an early form of taxation, where instead of paying with silver or grain, you paid with sweat and blisters. And what did all this effort get them? A bumper crop, if you played your cards right. All that nutrient-rich silt deposited by the floodwaters was pure gold for agriculture. The basins filled with water, slowly soaking into the soil, turning it into a lush, fertile ground. Wheat, barley, flax. These were the staples of the Egyptian diet and economy that sprouted from that soil. In fact, by around 3000 BCE, Egypt was one of the breadbaskets of the ancient world, exporting grain to neighbors far and wide. That's right, Egypt was basically the Costco of the ancient Mediterranean. Now, let's tackle a myth with all the finesse of a pharaoh wielding a crook and flail. The idea of Egypt as an endless land of plenty. Sure, when the Nile behaved, the fields were bountiful, but an unpredictable flood could spell disaster. Too little water meant crop failure and potential famine. Too much, and fields could be washed away, homes flooded, and the planting season thrown into chaos. The reality was a delicate balancing act where one bad flood could lead to a year of hardship, despite the best efforts of those canal-building crews. But wait, there's more. The socio-economic impact of these irrigation projects stretched beyond just food production. They were a hotbed of social organization and ingenuity. Picture this, coordinating thousands of workers, ensuring they were fed, housed, and not keeling over from exhaustion. It's like running a modern-day startup, but with a lot more sand and a distinct lack of ping-pong tables. The logistics were staggering, and it's a testament to the administrative prowess of the ancient Egyptians that they pulled it off year after year. This intense labor was not just about survival. It was a means of reinforcing the hierarchy. The pharaoh, seen as a living god, was credited with the prosperity that followed a successful harvest. It was a divine endorsement that kept the system ticking and the canals flowing. The Egyptians didn't just build a society. They engineered an entire ecosystem, one that intertwined the divine, the natural, and the human. So, while the romantic image of the Nile as a benevolent provider is appealing, the truth is a bit grittier. The Egyptian success lay not in the river itself, but in their ability to harness it. They turned potential disaster into opportunity, a trick that required innovation, organization, and a fair bit of elbow grease. This is where the real magic happened, not in the stars or the myths, but in the mud and the sweat. In this dance with the Nile, the Egyptians were both partners and choreographers, shaping their land with a deft touch. Yet, despite their efforts, the balance between the floods and their fortunes always hung in the balance. It was a high-stakes game where one wrong step could tip them from abundance to adversity. But hey, that's ancient Egypt for you, forever perched on the precipice of triumph and tragedy, proving that sometimes the greatest stories are written in the sands of uncertainty. And just when you thought the Egyptians couldn't possibly juggle any more flaming torches while balancing on a tightrope of mud and papyrus, we dive headfirst into the economic acrobatics that kept this pyramid-saturated society ticking. Now, if you thought the Nile's flooding was the end of the show, think again, because here comes the real circus act. How the Egyptians turned those unpredictable waters into the backbone of their economy with more flair than a Vegas magician. First up, we need to talk about the Egyptian calendar, which was about as practical as it gets. Forget January to December. These folks mapped their year around the Nile. The calendar was split into 3 seasons: Akhet, flooding; Peret, growing; and Shemu, harvesting. Each season was 4 months long, because who needs 12 months when you can have a neat 3-act play? During Akhet, the Nile had a starring role, transforming the dry riverbanks into fertile crescents. Then came Peret, when the fields were planted and crops grew like they had a personal trainer. Finally, Shemu brought the harvest, where all that hard work paid off in wheat and barley, not to mention a few sore backs. Now, here's where the plot thickens like a good Egyptian stew. The economy wasn't just about growing food. It was about managing resources, and that meant taxes. Yep, even in the ancient world, the only things certain were death and taxes. But in Egypt, taxes were as fluid as the Nile itself. The taxman wasn't just interested in how much grain you grew. He was keeping a keen eye on those floodwaters. Enter the Nilometer once again, this time as the unwitting accomplice in the grand taxation scheme. The Egyptians had a system where the height of the flood determined how much you owed the state. If the Nile hit that sweet spot on the Nilometer, it was tax time, baby. But if the waters misbehaved, the tax collector might end up with his sandals stuck in the mud. A bit like how you feel when your internet cuts out during your favorite show. Too high or too low, and the taxman would have to adjust his expectations, which was about as welcome as a sandstorm at a picnic. Talk about pressure. It's one thing to worry about the weather ruining your weekend plans, but imagine it dictating your entire year's income. This system was as complex as it was ingenious. The levees and canals not only irrigated fields, but also became a barometer for the economy. A well-behaved Nile meant a full granary, and a full granary meant the pharaoh could keep his golden sandals, and the kingdom could avoid a collective meltdown. Now, in the grand tradition of tax collectors everywhere, the Egyptian version came with its own set of quirks. These were no ordinary bean counters. They were more like ancient stand-up comedians with a penchant for creative accounting. Some might say they had the charm of a used chariot salesman, but hey, in a job that relies on the whims of a river, you need a sense of humor. Imagine the scene. The tax collector arrives, armed with a papyrus scroll and an attitude. They measure the grain with standardized weights that, let's be honest, might have been fudged a little. And if you were short on your taxes, well, let's just say the Egyptians invented the IOU long before it became a Wall Street staple. You might be asked to cough up more the next year or provide labor for the state projects. It was the original pay now or pay later scheme, and let's face it, who doesn't love deferred payments? But here's the kicker. This wasn't just about squeezing the last drop of beer from the barrel. Tax collection was a vital cog in maintaining the social hierarchy. The pharaoh, seen as the divine intermediary between the gods and mere mortals, was the ultimate benefactor of the Nile's bounty. When taxes flowed smoothly, it reinforced his status as the cosmic linchpin holding the universe together. A bad flood year. Well, that might just mean a new set of sandals for the tax collector, but a serious headache for the ruler. And let's not forget the bureaucrats, those unsung heroes of papyrus bushing. They were the ones keeping the books, making sure every grain was accounted for, and occasionally inventing new ways to measure things. It's no wonder the scribes were held in high esteem. They were the original data analysts, crunching numbers like their lives depended on it, which, let's be real, they probably did. The taxation system was a double-edged sword. It funded grandiose projects like temples and tombs, but also kept the lights on, literally and metaphorically, for the entire kingdom. A well-oiled taxation machine meant the difference between a thriving Egypt and one that was barely keeping its head above the floodwaters. In truth, the tax collectors were the bridge between the divine and the mundane, turning the Nile's unpredictable floods into a predictable source of revenue. And while the system was far from perfect, it worked well enough to keep Egypt's economy afloat for millennia. It's a testament to human ingenuity, and maybe a little bit of divine intervention, that they managed to balance the scales year after year, Nile flood after Nile flood. So, the next time you grumble about taxes, spare a thought for those ancient Egyptians. They didn't have the luxury of direct deposit or digital spreadsheets, but they had a river that was as capricious as it was generous. They turned its whims into an economic powerhouse, one tax collector at a time. And that, my friends, is a legacy as enduring as the pyramids themselves. So, while those ancient Egyptian tax collectors were busy balancing the books like a Cirque du Soleil performer on a tightrope, let's turn our gaze upward to the big boss, the pharaoh. Now, if you think CEOs today have a lot on their plate, try being a pharaoh, where the job description includes pleasing the gods and keeping the Nile in line. No pressure, right? First, let's get one thing straight. Pharaohs weren't just kings, they were living gods. No, seriously. They were believed to be Horus in the flesh, the falcon-headed deity who had a penchant for ruling with divine panache. Their divine status was like an ancient form of celebrity endorsement, but instead of hawking sneakers, they were selling stability and prosperity. When the Nile delivered its annual gift of fertile floods, the people saw it as a celestial thumbs-up for the pharaoh's divine right to rule. But here's where it gets juicy. When the Nile behaved, pharaohs basked in the glory. It was like scoring a touchdown in the Super Bowl of ancient politics. The people would be all, "Hey, the floods are perfect. Our pharaoh must be really tight with the gods." Cue the adoration, offerings, and perhaps a few new monuments with the pharaoh's name etched in stone for eternity. After all, what's the point of being a god king if you can't flaunt a few pyramids? However, when the floods went rogue, the narrative shifted faster than you can say, "Where's my papyrus umbrella?" A failed flood wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a political crisis. Imagine the scene. Crops withering, granaries emptying, and people asking uncomfortable questions about whether the pharaoh had lost his divine mojo. It's like if your Wi-Fi cuts out right in the middle of an important Zoom call. Suddenly, everyone's wondering if you're really the tech-savvy guru you claim to be. In these turbulent times, being a pharaoh wasn't all glamour and golden sandals. It involved a hefty dose of damage control. If the floodwaters didn't hit the sweet spot, you had to convince your people that it was all part of a divine plan, or at least that the gods were just testing your mettle. And let's not forget the priests, the pharaoh's spiritual PR team, who had to spin these watery mishaps into teachable moments of cosmic patience. Picture them as ancient spin doctors, crafting narratives that would make even the slickest political strategists nod in approval. But let's not brush past the gritty realities. When the Nile misbehaved, it wasn't just a political hiccup. The effects rippled through the entire society like a stone tossed into a pond. Famine could strike, leading to unrest and even rebellion. History tells us that a few pharaohs lost their thrones, quite literally drowned by political upheaval, when the river failed to deliver. Remember the Old Kingdom's collapse around 2200 BCE? Yeah, a string of poor floods didn't help the situation. Now, here's a sharp observation about human nature. People love to blame someone when things go south. And when your ruler claims to have a heartline to the gods, well, they're the perfect scapegoat. So, while the pharaohs were busy building their legacy in stone and gold, they also had to keep a keen eye on those floodwaters. A well-managed flood was a ticket to immortality. A mismanaged one was a fast track to a very public fall from grace. Yet, despite the challenges, many pharaohs managed to navigate these treacherous waters with aplomb. Take Amenemhat Roman III, for example. In the Middle Kingdom, he was the master of flood control, building massive canal systems and the famous Lake Moeris to regulate the waters. His reign is remembered as a golden age of prosperity, proving that when the Nile was tamed, the pharaoh's stature shone as bright as the desert sun. But let's not get too misty-eyed. While the pharaohs might have strutted around in their divine regalia, the reality was that their power was as fluid as the Nile itself. Behind the gilded masks and ceremonious rituals, there was a constant undercurrent of uncertainty. In a world where the whims of nature could topple a dynasty, the pharaohs' real power came from their ability to adapt, to innovate, and yes, to occasionally fudge the narrative when the floods didn't quite cooperate. So, next time you marvel at those towering pyramids or the grandeur of Egyptian civilization, remember this. At the heart of it all was a river that could make or break a god king's reign. The Nile was both a lifeline and a wild card, a capricious partner in the dance of power. And the pharaohs, for all their divine trappings, were just trying to keep their heads above water, quite literally. In the grand tapestry of history, the pharaohs' relationship with the Nile was a masterpiece of political theater. Their reigns were defined not just by their monumental achievements, but by how they navigated the murky waters of uncertainty, an eternal reminder that even gods, or those who claim to be, need a little luck and a lot of savvy. And as the curtain falls on this act, remember, there's still more to this story, with plenty of mysteries left to unravel in the sands of time. Stay tuned, because the Nile's tale is far from over. And so we glide into the modern world, where the ancient dance with the Nile has taken on a new beat. You see, the legacy of those early flood management systems is alive and well, just dressed up in 21st century garb. Today's Egyptians are still in a relationship with the Nile, albeit a slightly more engineered one. Gone are the days when priests would gaze at the stars, Nilometers would mark stone like ancient Fitbits, and pharaohs would cross their fingers as the river rose. Instead, we've got dams, canals, and irrigation networks that are as complex as a soap opera plotline. Enter the Aswan High Dam, Egypt's modern marvel. Built between 1960 and 1970, this colossal structure is like a concrete exclamation point on the Nile, stretching 830 meters across, and standing 111 meters high. It's the ancient Egyptians' wildest dreams in hydraulic form, a feat of engineering that would make even the most ambitious pharaohs nod in approval. But here's the kicker. The Aswan High Dam isn't just about controlling floods. It's a complete game changer for agriculture, electricity, and water management in Egypt. Let's break it down. Back in the day, the Egyptians were at the mercy of the Nile's moods. Today, Lake Nasser, the dam's massive reservoir, is Egypt's water bank, holding about 132 cubic kilometers of water. That's enough to make ancient Egyptians drop their coal pencils in awe. This reservoir ensures a stable year-round water supply, turning the Nile's annual gamble into a more predictable affair. Farmers can irrigate their fields without waiting for the river's yearly inundation, effectively rewriting the agricultural calendar. But it's not all sunshine and pyramids. The Aswan High Dam has its own set of complications. Sure, it prevents those catastrophic floods and droughts, but it's also changed the Nile's ecosystem, a bit like putting a leash on a wild stallion. Before the dam, the Nile's floods deposited nutrient-rich silt on the fields, a natural fertilizer that kept the land fertile. Now, that silt sits at the bottom of Lake Nasser, and Egyptian farmers rely on chemical fertilizers to maintain their yields. It's like swapping homemade hummus for the store-bought stuff. Not quite the same, but it gets the job done. And then there's the issue of salinization. With water flow controlled, the Nile doesn't flush out the salts in the soil as effectively, leading to saltier fields and a few more gray hairs for the farmers. It's a trade-off, like choosing between a vintage vinyl and a Spotify playlist. Both have their perks, but the experience is definitely different. Economically, the Aswan High Dam is a powerhouse, quite literally. It supplies about 1 gigawatts of hydroelectric power, lighting up Egyptian cities and reducing reliance on fossil fuels. It's an outcome that would have had the ancients bowing to the engineers rather than the gods. Yet, in this power play, there's a delicate balance between the benefits and the environmental costs. The dam has displaced communities and affected fisheries downstream, a reminder that progress often comes with a price tag. Now, if you're wondering what the ancient Egyptians would make of all this, picture them standing on modern shores, linen kilts flapping in the breeze, eyes wide at the sight of this behemoth of a dam. They'd probably nod in appreciation of the ingenuity, perhaps even offer a silent prayer to Happy, the Nile god, for blessing this new era of water management. But you can bet they'd have a few choice words about the silt situation and the lack of stargazing opportunities. After all, these were people who turned watching the sky into an art form, not to mention a survival skill. The Aswan High Dam is just one chapter in the ongoing saga of the Nile and its people. Its construction echoes the ancient efforts to tame the river, a testament to humanity's perpetual struggle to control nature. The Egyptians of today are still writing this story, navigating the complexities of modern water management with a nod to their ancestors' legacy. And as we wrap up this tale of water and wonder, it's worth reflecting on the timelessness of it all. The Nile may have traded its seasonal floods for a more regulated flow, but its role as Egypt's lifeline remains unchanged. It's a river that has shaped civilizations, inspired legends, and sparked innovations from the days of pharaohs to the age of electricity. So, next time you find yourself admiring a pyramid or marveling at a modern dam, remember the intricate dance that brought us here. It's a story of adaptation, resilience, and the enduring quest to harness the power of nature. One flood, one dam, one generation at a time. And who knows, maybe the ancients are somewhere out there, smiling at our attempts to balance on the razor's edge between progress and preservation. The docks of Constantinople are a sensory overload of sights, sounds, and smells, and none of them are subtle. Welcome to the 9th century, where a blend of ambition and chaos fuels the Byzantine Empire's trading frenzy. You're not just another face in the crowd. You're a merchant with dreams of silk, spices, and maybe a touch of glory if you can survive the logistics of it all. Picture yourself amidst the cacophony of shouting dockworkers, the creaking of wooden hulls, and the pungent aroma of spices mixing with salt water. It's not glamorous, but it sure is alive. Now, about those silk roads you've heard so much about. This isn't just a catchy phrase, it's the lifeline of the empire. The Byzantines didn't just dabble in trade, they owned it like a maestro conducting a symphony of commerce. Silk, spices, precious metals, you name it, they traded it. And Constantinople, perched strategically between Europe and Asia like a seasoned chess player, was the empire's crowning jewel. But don't let the romanticized tales fool you. This was less about silk-waving glamour and more about shrewd deals and survival tactics. As a merchant, you're not only hustling against the clock, but also the Byzantine tax collectors, the empire's unsung heroes of economic strategy. These guys have a knack for turning trade into a science of revenue. The Kalmakian tax, a juicy 10% cut on all goods coming in and going out, has kept the imperial coffers jingling with coins. Not exactly the Robin Hoods of their day, but hey, someone's got to fund the empire's lavish tastes and military campaigns. Ever wonder why those Byzantine emperors wore such snazzy purple robes? Look no further than your tax payments hard at work. But let's not get too cynical. This system, for all its fiscal precision, has created a vast network of trade routes that crisscross the known world. We're talking about a web extending from the chilly reaches of the Scandinavian north to the sizzling sands of North Africa, and beyond to the distant horizons of China and India. It's a world map of interconnections, and you're smack in the middle of it. You're not just dealing with goods, you're exchanging cultures, ideas, and sometimes even diseases. Plague anyone. As you prepare for a voyage that could last weeks, maybe months, the stakes are palpable. The Mediterranean Sea is no millpond. Pirates, storms, and the simple existential dread of the open sea are constant companions. But the promise of profit and prestige keeps you tethered to this way of life. Pack your cargo wisely. Silk, saffron, black pepper, or maybe some exotic animals if the mood strikes. Each item is not merely a product, but a potential windfall in the bustling markets of Alexandria or Venice. You're not alone in this venture. The docks are teeming with fellow merchants, sailors, and opportunists, each with their own dreams and schemes. You might overhear snippets of Greek mixed with Latin, Arabic, and a smattering of every language under the sun. The marketplace is a living Babel, where a nod, a handshake, or a shared drink can seal a deal faster than any contract. Behind this vibrant chaos, there's a political layer that keeps things interesting. The Byzantine Empire is a complex beast. It's an amalgamation of bureaucratic efficiency and imperial grandeur, all wrapped up in an orthodox Christian package. Religious festivals, political power plays, and philosophical debates. This is the backdrop to your daily grind. The Empire likes to think of itself as the new Rome, but with a bit more flair and a lot more infighting. As you load your ship, remember the tales of merchants who made it big and those who didn't return at all. The sea is a fickle partner. it gives and it takes with equal measure. So you hedge your bets with libations to Poseidon, because hey, it never hurts to have a guard on your side, even if it's just for luck. Superstition and pragmatism walk hand in hand in your world. Dismiss neither. The wind picks up, and sails are unfurled. As your vessel pulls away from the dark, the city's skyline, a jagged silhouette of domes and minarets, begins to shrink. The Hagia Sophia, with its majestic dome, stands as a testament to both faith and architectural prowess. It's a reminder of what's at stake, a city that straddles continents and eras, a beacon of civilization and commerce. Your journey has just begun, but the destination, that's a tale for another time, with twists, turns, and a few surprises along the way. This isn't just about survival. It's about thriving in a world where fortunes are made, or lost, at sea. So, hold on to your hat, or rather your Byzantine cap, because the open waters await, and history has a way of being anything but predictable. Your journey has just begun, but there's no time for wistful gazing at Constantinople's skyline. The Mediterranean Sea is calling, and it's time to get acquainted with your home for the foreseeable future, the Draman. Now, let's talk ships. Forget the romantic visions of sleek vessels skimming effortlessly across azure waves. The Draman, the Byzantine Navy's workhorse, is less love boat and more utilitarian beast. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a minivan, sturdy, reliable, but not exactly the stuff dreams are made of. Imagine a long, narrow hull, designed for speed and maneuverability, bristling with oars and ready to launch a volley of Greek fire. Yes, Greek fire, the original flamethrower, guaranteed to ruin any pirate's day. But here's the catch. The Draman is essentially a floating tinderbox. One stray spark, and it's game over, a maritime barbecue you didn't sign up for. You're not just contending with the elements, you're sharing deck space with barrels of highly flammable liquid. Welcome to seafaring in the 9th century, where the stakes are always high, and safety regulations are more of a suggestion than a rule. Now, about packing for the voyage. If you think your family's road trip packing list is daunting, try equipping a ship for months at sea. We're talking about a logistical nightmare that would make even the most seasoned traveler break into a sweat. Forget luxury items. Space is at a premium, and every inch counts. So, what do you bring? Hardtack, the medieval version of a granola bar, minus the flavor. It's basically flour, water, and salt baked into a biscuit so hard you could chip a tooth on it. But hey, it lasts forever. Pair it with dried fish, and you've got a meal that's both nutritious and guaranteed to build character. Water's another issue. Freshwater storage is critical, but those barrels take up space you'd rather use for goods that actually turn a profit. Desalination technology, not a chance. It's all about rainwater collection and praying for a downpour. And speaking of prayers, navigating the high seas is less about charts and more about celestial guesswork. The North Star is your best friend, but clouds can turn even the most experienced sailor into a nervous wreck. GPS, you ask. How about a healthy dose of guesstimation and fervent invocations to St. Nicholas, the patron saint of sailors? Weather forecasting is equally primitive. Forget about meteorological insights. Your best indicators are the clouds and the wind direction, and even then, it's a gamble. A sudden storm can turn your voyage into a nightmare, and pirates are always lurking, eager to relieve you of your hard-earned cargo. But it's not all doom and gloom. The camaraderie among the crew can be a lifeline, a shared bond forged through hardship, and the occasional shared flask of raki. Every sailor has a story, and as the waves lap against the hull, tales of far-off lands and mythical creatures flow as freely as the sea itself. The maritime world is a microcosm of the Byzantine Empire, diverse, complex, and full of contradictions. Your fellow sailors hail from across the empire's vast expanse, a melting pot of languages, cultures, and beliefs. It's a floating Babel, where Greek might be the lingua franca, but snippets of Latin, Arabic, and even Old Norse echo across the deck. In this crucible of diversity, you're not just trading goods, but exchanging ideas, stories, and sometimes even the occasional insult. The journey is a test of endurance, both physical and mental. The open sea is an unforgiving mistress, and there are days when the horizon seems endless, a monochrome blur of sky and water. But for every moment of despair, there are flashes of beauty. A pod of dolphins dancing alongside the ship, the sunrise painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. These moments remind you why you chose this life, why you endure the hardships and risks. It's not just about the promise of profit, but the thrill of discovery, the allure of the unknown. As the days turn into weeks, the rhythm of the sea becomes your own. The creak of the timbers, the slap of the waves, the salty tang of the air. It's a symphony of survival, a testament to human resilience. You learn to navigate by the stars, to read the wind and the waves, to adapt and overcome. The Byzantine Empire might be a land of grandeur and opulence, but out here, it's the simple things that matter: friendship, fortitude, and faith. Yet the allure of the sea is always tempered by its perils. Every decision, every maneuver is a gamble, a roll of the dice in a game where the stakes couldn't be higher. You're not just a merchant, you're an adventurer, a pioneer charting a course through a world of uncertainty. The open waters are both a promise and a threat, a paradox that defines your life. So, as you stand on the deck, eyes fixed on the horizon, remember this: you're not just part of a trade network, you're part of something bigger, a tapestry of history woven with threads of courage and ambition. The Byzantine Empire may be a distant memory to us now, but in your hands, its legacy lives on, carried by the winds and the waves to distant shores. The journey is far from over, and the sea has many more stories to tell. Hold fast, for the adventure is just beginning. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of the open sea. The Mediterranean is less a tranquil expanse and more a chaotic highway where pirates have their own version of finders keepers. You might think that the Byzantine Empire, with its reputation for glittering mosaics and sophisticated theology, would have a handle on this. But in reality, it was more like the Wild West with waves, except the cowboys rode ships and the saloons were floating dens of thieves. Now, let's talk about those pirates. Forget Jack Sparrow. These guys were more opportunistic than charming, and the Mediterranean was their playground. Vikings, Saracens, and even some of your fellow Byzantines took a stab at piracy, driven by the same motivations that fuel any good heist: profit and prestige, with a side of survival. It wasn't about swashbuckling adventures. It was about cold, hard cash, and getting by in a world where the line between merchant and marauder was as thin as a sail. Piracy was a lucrative gig, let's be honest. Capture a merchant ship, and you could walk away with silk, spices, maybe even some precious metals if you were lucky. The rewards were high, and the risks, well, they were also high, but that's what made it exciting, or terrifying, if you were on the wrong side of a pirate raid. The seas were a free-for-all, and unless you were prepared, the odds were not in your favor. So, what did the Byzantines do to keep their floating economy from becoming a pirate's retirement plan? Enter the Byzantine navy, the empire's not-so-secret weapon. These guys were like the medieval coast guard, tasked with patrolling the seas and protecting trade routes. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't about altruism. The empire's coffers depended on trade, and every ship lost to piracy was a dent in their grand fiscal strategy. In other words, protecting merchants was more about safeguarding the empire's tax revenue than some noble cause. The Byzantine navy was no joke. Armed with the infamous Greek fire, they were the last thing pirates wanted to see on the horizon. Greek fire, by the way, was this terrifying, flammable liquid that could burn on water. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of napalm, and you'll understand why it struck fear into the hearts of would-be marauders. The navy's presence was a double-edged sword, though. While it kept pirates at bay, it also reminded merchants of the empire's ever-watchful eye, ensuring that those taxes were paid in full. But you didn't just rely on the navy to keep you safe. Merchants were resourceful, and they knew when to play it safe and when to hedge their bets. Hiring armed guards was a common practice, a necessary expense in the high-stakes world of medieval trade. Sure, it cut into your profits, but better a smaller profit than no profit at all, or worse, ending up as a pirate's trophy. These guards were your insurance policy, and they weren't just muscle. They were seasoned professionals who knew the seas and the risks lurking beneath every wave. The Byzantine Empire, for all its grandeur, was a land of contradictions. It was a place where faith and commerce, piracy and protection all danced a complicated waltz. The empire's investment in naval prowess wasn't just about keeping the peace on the high seas. It was a calculated move to maintain control over the lucrative trade routes that fed its insatiable appetite for wealth and power. As a merchant, you lived in the shadow of these contradictions. Every decision was a gamble, every voyage a test of your wits and nerve. The pirates were out there, a constant threat, but so was the promise of profit. It was this delicate balance between risk and reward, danger and opportunity, that defined your life on the sea. The Mediterranean, with its azure waves and sun-drenched coasts, was both a paradise and a battleground. It was a place where fortunes were made and lost, where the line between success and failure was as thin as a whisper. You navigated this world with one eye on the horizon and the other on the shadows, always aware of the dangers lurking just out of sight. Yet despite the risks, the allure of the sea was undeniable. It was a world of endless possibilities, where each new day brought the promise of adventure and discovery. You weren't just a merchant, you were a part of something larger, a player in the grand drama of Byzantine commerce and conquest. So, as the sun sets on another day at sea, you take a moment to reflect on the journey so far. The open waters are calling, and the adventure is far from over. The Byzantine Empire may have been a land of complexity and contradiction, but it was also a place where dreams came to life, where the boundaries between legend and reality blurred into one. Hold steady, for the Mediterranean has many more stories to tell, and your voyage is just beginning. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the rolling waves, the sea reveals its truth. It's not just a highway of commerce, but a stage where human dramas unfold. Welcome to the Byzantine ship, a microcosm of society where rank, law, and a good dose of human folly play out on a daily basis. If you think managing a modern office is tough, try juggling the egos and elbows of a ship's crew while navigating treacherous waters. First things first, the hierarchy aboard a Byzantine vessel is as rigid as a tax collector's ledger. At the top sits the captain, or Norachos if you're feeling fancy. He's not just the man steering the ship, he's the king of this wooden kingdom. His word is law, and he's got Byzantine statutes to back him up. This isn't a democracy, folks. It's a meritocracy with a splash of absolute authority. The captain decides when to set sail, when to dock, and perhaps most importantly, when to break out the good raki, because nothing says morale booster like a shared drink. But don't think the captain's life is all smooth sailing. He's balancing the demands of merchants, the whims of the weather, and the ever-present threat of mutiny. One wrong move and he's out faster than you can say, man overboard. Below him is the first mate, the enforcer of the captain's rules, and the one you'd better cozy up to if you want any favors. This guy's got the ear of the captain and the respect of the crew, a precarious balance that's as delicate as a Byzantine mosaic. Then there are the sailors, the backbone of the operation. These men are the salt of the earth, or rather, the salt of the sea. They hail from every corner of the empire, a ragtag band of Greeks, Armenians, Slavs, and maybe the odd Goth or two. Each sailor is a story in himself, with tales of far-off lands, loves lost to the sea, and dreams of wealth that keep them rowing through the night. The deckhands, the newest recruits, are at the bottom of the food chain, often treated like the seaweed caught in the ship's rudder. But they're eager, and in this world, eagerness is half the battle. Now, you might assume that life on a Byzantine ship is all about avoiding pirates and praying for favorable winds, but the real challenge is managing this floating society. Byzantine law is as intricate as the empire itself, governing everything from trade disputes to onboard brawls. The nomos nauticos, a maritime code, is your best friend and worst enemy. This isn't just a set of rules, it's a survival guide written in ink and salt water. Social dynamics on board are as volatile as a barrel of Greek fire. With cramped quarters and long voyages, tempers flare, and allegiances shift faster than the tides. A sailor's life is a constant negotiation, a balancing act between cooperation and competition. It's the ultimate game of survival, and everyone's playing for keeps. When the ship finally docks at a foreign port, the real fireworks begin. Byzantine merchants are like cultural ambassadors. Their ships the vessels of exchange, not just of goods, but of ideas, languages, and customs. Imagine Alexandria, Venice, or Antioch, where the docks are a cacophony of voices. Greek mingles with Latin, Arabic, and even a bit of Chinese if you're lucky. It's a marketplace of the world, and you're not just trading silk and spices, you're bartering in stories and secrets. This melting pot is where Byzantine merchants truly shine. Their ability to haggle is legendary, and they've got the scars to prove it. A successful trade deal is as much about charm and wit as it is about the goods you're selling. You quickly learn that a smile and a shared cup of wine can seal a deal faster than 1,000 words. And let's be honest, Nothing breaks the ice like a Byzantine merchant with a twinkle in his eye and a tale of adventure. But don't be fooled by the romanticized notion of cultural exchange. This isn't a utopia of harmony and understanding. It's a battleground of wits and wallets. Every interaction is a chess game, and you better be thinking 3 moves ahead. The Byzantine laws governing trade are as labyrinthine as the emperor's palace, designed to keep the empire's coffers full and its merchants on their toes. In these bustling ports, you're not just trading goods, you're trading identities. You adopt new customs, speak new languages, and sometimes even adopt new names. It's a constant reinvention, a dance between tradition and innovation, survival and success. The Byzantine Empire may be a distant memory to us now, but on the decks of these ships, its legacy lives on, echoing through every transaction and every tale told by the light of a distant star. As the ship sets sail once more, the horizon beckons with new adventures and challenges. The sea is both a barrier and a bridge, a reminder of the world's vastness and the possibilities that lie beyond. The journey is far from over, and the stories are just beginning. So hold on to your hat, or your Byzantine cap, because the open waters await, and history has a way of being anything but predictable. So here you are, sailing the seas at the heart of one of history's most dynamic empires, the Byzantine Empire. This isn't just about manning the helm or surviving the salt spray. Your role as a Byzantine merchant is like being a cog in a vast machine that's churning out the future of global trade. Let's get real. The very act of loading that silk onto a ship is setting the stage for the world's first proto-globalization. You, my friend, are an early agent of international commerce, whether you know it or not. Now, let's dive into the meat of it. These Byzantine voyages were more than just business trips with the occasional pirate skirmish. They were the arteries of a living, breathing empire that managed to connect the darts across continents. Picture this, a network stretching from the bustling bazaars of Baghdad to the opulent courts of China, all linked by the maritime roads you navigate. It's a bit like being part of the internet before the internet, but instead of fiber optics, you've got sails and oars. And here's the kicker. Your trade routes didn't just move goods. They moved cultures, ideas, languages, and yes, even diseases, because nothing says global impact like a good old-fashioned pandemic. Take the Byzantine silk trade, for instance. It wasn't just about fashion or luxury. It was a diplomatic tool, a symbol of power that even kept Roman emperors eager to flaunt their Byzantine imports. The empire's monopolistic grip on silk was akin to having a stranglehold on today's smartphone market. But let's not romanticize this too much. The life of a merchant was less about adventure and more about logistics and survival. Sure, the tales of exotic lands add a sprinkle of allure, but the reality, it's long, treacherous months at sea, sweltering heat, and the constant threat of losing everything to a storm or a band of marauding pirates. The myth of the adventurous merchant glosses over the grit. It's like saying a rock star's life is just about the concerts and ignoring the endless hours on the tour bus. Back to the economic nitty-gritty. These Byzantine trade networks weren't just about moving goods. They were about creating an economic ecosystem. The Byzantine gold solidus became the currency of choice in Mediterranean trade, a testament to the empire's economic might. When your coin is the gold standard, you're not just playing the game, you're setting the rules. And that, dear listener, is how you lay the groundwork for complex economic systems that echo into the modern age. Politically, the Byzantine Empire was a chessboard of intrigue and power plays, with trade routes as its critical pieces. Control the trade, and you control the empire's pulse. This is why the Byzantine navy was so crucial, not just for defense, but as the silent enforcers of imperial policy. It's like having a fleet of battleships ensure your delivery trucks make it on time. The empire's ability to maintain these routes allowed it to outlast its Western Roman counterpart by a good 1,000 years. Talk about longevity. And then there's the cultural exchange. The Byzantine Empire was the ultimate melting pot. A Byzantine ship was like a floating UN meeting, where Greek, Latin, Arabic, and even Chinese might echo across the deck. This constant cross-pollination of ideas and customs gave rise to a cosmopolitan culture that was as diverse as it was dynamic. You weren't just transporting goods, you were a courier of culture, aiding in the spread of Byzantine art, science, and philosophy across the world. But make no mistake, this wasn't a multicultural utopia. Cultural exchanges often came with their own set of challenges, and misunderstanding could quickly escalate into conflict. Yet, it's this blend of cultures that laid the groundwork for what we now call globalization. Today's globalized world owes a nod to those Byzantine merchants who bridged civilizations with their trade routes. So, as you let your eyes wander across the endless horizon, recognize that you're not just a merchant. You're part of a legacy that shaped the world, a legacy of trade, culture, and commerce that echoes into our modern era. The romanticized tales of Byzantine merchants may gloss over the harsh realities, but it's in those gritty details that the true story lies. The story of resilience, innovation, and the indomitable human spirit. And as we draw the curtain on this chapter of history, let's dispel one final myth. The life of a Byzantine merchant wasn't all about the thrill of discovery or the joy of profit. It was a life of endurance, of facing the unpredictable sea and equally unpredictable markets. It was about survival, about making do with what you had and hoping the winds and the gods were in your favor. The Byzantine Empire may have crumbled, its grandeur reduced to ruins and legends, but its influence lingers. The trade networks you once navigated have morphed into modern supply chains. The cultural exchanges you facilitated have evolved into global dialogues. In the end, the legacy of Byzantine merchants is not just in the goods they traded, but in the connections they forged and the world they helped shape, a world that continues to sail on the currents of history. So next time you think of those ancient mariners, remember them as they were, not just romantic adventurers or mere traders, but as pioneers of a complex economic and cultural order. Their voyages were not just journeys across the sea, but through the annals of time, leaving behind a legacy as enduring as the tides they once sailed. In the grand theater of history, the curtain rises on ancient Mesopotamia, a place where the past literally oozes out of the mud. We're talking about a society that built its world on muddy bricks and a couple of ambitious rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which, in a move that sounds like a real estate developer's fever dream, decided to carve out a fertile crescent right in the heart of the Middle East. It's the original location, location, location mantra, just without the ocean view and with a hefty side of unpredictable flooding. But hey, nobody said the cradle of civilization would be a 5-star resort. At the epicenter of this ancient world stood the ziggurat, a kind of Mesopotamian skyscraper, except it was less glass and steel and more sun-baked clay. These towering temples were the architectural flex of their time, reaching skyward as if to say, "Look at me, I'm so important. Even the gods need to climb a few flights to reach my pinnacle." Ziggurats were the social and spiritual hubs of city-states like Uruk, and Babylon, each trying to outdo the other with a bigger, better mud pyramid. In a world where everything was subject to the whims of nature and capricious deities, these constructions were a testament to human ambition and, let's be honest, a little bit of hubris. Now, let's talk about something that's arguably even more foundational than mud bricks: writing. Yes, the Mesopotamians were the OG scribes, inventing cuneiform around 3200 BCE, which is basically the ancient version of a really messy text message. If you think your handwriting is bad, imagine carving your grocery list into clay tablets and then baking them for posterity. The Mesopotamians started with pictographs, which evolved into a system of wedge-shaped marks that could convey complex ideas, record transactions, and immortalize the epic tales of kings who were probably more legend than reality. It's like Twitter, but with more clay and fewer trolls. Cuneiform wasn't just for show. It was a tool of power and control. The ability to write meant you could document laws, like Hammurabi's Code, which laid down the rules of society with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Eye for an eye wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a literal directive. These tablets also chronicled economic transactions, listing the exchange of goods with a precision that would make modern accountants weep with envy. And speaking of goods, let's not forget barley, a staple of the Mesopotamian diet and economy. Barley wasn't just food. It was a currency, a commodity, and the base ingredient for beer, which was basically the liquid bread of the ancients. Forget gold. In Mesopotamia, barley was king. It was the paycheck for workers, the tax collected by the state, and the offering made to the gods. So, when you raised a mug of barley brew, you were participating in an economic cycle as old as civilization itself. It was sustenance and social glue, a way to unwind after a hard day of bricklaying or tablet scribing. But let's not romanticize it too much. Living in a mud-brick city with no indoor plumbing wasn't exactly a dream. The streets were narrow and winding, designed more for donkeys than chariots, and sanitation was an afterthought. If you think your city has a rat problem, try dealing with one in a place where refuse was tossed into the streets and disease was a constant companion. Yet, despite these challenges, Mesopotamians created a complex social structure that laid the groundwork for future empires. In this world of gods and kings, there was a hierarchy as rigid as a freshly baked clay tablet. At the top stood the king, who claimed divine right, but still had to keep the priests happy. These priests were the intermediaries between the divine and the mortal, wielding influence that could rival any ruler. Below them were the scribes, elite members of society who could turn clay into power with a few swift strokes of a stylus. Then came the merchants and artisans, the lifeblood of the economy, trading goods and crafting wares in a society that thrived on commerce. The vast majority, however, were farmers and laborers, toiling in the fields and building the very structures that defined their civilization. They might not have had the glamour of kings or the prestige of scribes, but they were the backbone of Mesopotamia. And despite the backbreaking work and lack of modern conveniences, there was a certain resilience to their way of life, a determination to carve out a living in a world that was as harsh as it was beautiful. So, as we dive deeper into the story of Mesopotamia, let's keep in mind the mud and sweat that shaped this ancient society. It wasn't all grand temples and epic tales. It was also about the everyday lives of people who built a civilization from nothing but clay, barley, and sheer willpower. Now, let's dive into the Mesopotamian social ladder, where every rung was a story of power, privilege, and occasionally poetic justice. At the top of this ancient pecking order stood the king, a figure who was part god, part politician, and entirely preoccupied with maintaining the illusion of divine backing. These monarchs weren't just content to rule. They had to prove they had the gods' speed dial, which, let's be honest, is like trying to convince your coworkers you have the CEO's personal number. Risky business if you get caught bluffing. The kings of Mesopotamia were masters of spin long before PR firms were a twinkle in anyone's eye. They'd commission grandiose inscriptions and reliefs, painting themselves as valiant warriors and wise judges. But let's not kid ourselves. Being a Mesopotamian king wasn't all about basking in the glory of divine favor. Behind the smoke and mirrors, there was a constant scramble for survival, a real-life game of thrones where the stakes were as high as the ziggurats. Take Sargon of Akkad, for instance. He wasn't just content with ruling a city. He went on to become one of history's first empire builders around 2334 BCE, creating a dominion that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. But even this mighty ruler had to contend with rebellions and the ever-looming threat of assassination. Because in those days, your crown was only as secure as your grip on the sword. Beneath these rulers were the priests, who wielded spiritual power with as much zeal as a modern influencer peddling detox teas. They were the gatekeepers of divine will, interpreting the whims of the gods and ensuring that the king's edicts didn't stray too far from celestial approval. Let's not sugarcoat it. The relationship between kings and priests was often more transactional than transcendent. The priests needed the king's protection, and the king needed the priests to keep the populace believing in his divine mandate. It was a delicate dance of mutual benefit, with each side trying to outmaneuver the other in a cosmic game of chess. And then there were the scribes, the unsung heroes of Mesopotamian society. These guys were like the rock stars of their day, except instead of guitars, they wielded reed styluses. Scribes were the literate elite, the few who could read and write in a world where most people couldn't even spell their own name. They were essential for everything from composing royal decrees to keeping track of grain shipments. Imagine trying to run an empire without a single Excel sheet or Google Docs. Impossible without these scribes. In a society where knowledge was literally power, these scribes held the keys to the kingdom's continuity and prosperity. But let's peel back the romantic veneer for a moment. The life of a scribe wasn't all glamour and glory. Training to become a scribe was a long and grueling process, akin to getting a PhD in bureaucracy. It took years of studying under a master, deciphering cuneiform until your eyes crossed, and your wrist ached, but the payoff was worth it. Scribes enjoyed a status similar to that of modern-day tech geniuses, their skills in high demand, and their connections to the upper echelons of society firmly established. Now, if the upper classes were the glittering jewels of Mesopotamian society, the merchants and artisans were its sturdy scaffolding. These were the folks who kept the economy humming with their craft and commerce. Merchants traveled vast distances, from Anatolia to the Indus Valley, trading goods like textiles, metals, and of course, barley. They were the embodiment of the phrase, hustle hard, navigating treacherous trade routes in pursuit of profit. Meanwhile, artisans crafted everything from pottery to intricate jewelry, turning raw materials into objects of beauty and utility. But let's not romanticize their lives too much. Behind every exquisite artifact was a craftsman toiling away in a dimly lit workshop, far removed from the splendor of the king's court. And what about the farmers and laborers, the real backbone of Mesopotamian society? These were the men and women who worked the fields, dug the irrigation canals, and constructed the very ziggurats that defined their cities. Their lives were a never-ending cycle of planting and harvesting, a constant battle against the whims of the Tigris and Euphrates. Yet, despite the back-breaking labor and the ever-present threat of famine or flood, there was a certain resilience to their existence, a testament to human endurance and ingenuity. Now, here's where things get a bit more complicated. At the bottom of this social pyramid were the slaves, the individuals who had the least agency in their lives, yet whose contributions were indispensable. The concept of slavery in Mesopotamia was nuanced. Slaves could be prisoners of war, debtors, or even people who sold themselves into servitude to escape poverty. But here's the twist. Unlike in many other ancient societies, Mesopotamian slaves had certain rights and could even buy their freedom. They could own property, marry, and in some cases, rise through the social ranks if they managed to secure their emancipation. It was a system that, while undeniably harsh, offered a glimmer of hope and mobility, a rarity in a world where one's social status was often as unyielding as a clay tablet. So, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexity of Mesopotamian society. It was a world where the divine and the mundane collided, where power was both a celestial gift and a political endeavor. A place where the lines between myth and reality were as blurred as the horizon on a hot summer day in the Fertile Crescent. As we continue our journey through this ancient land, remember that behind every king's decree and every scribe's tablet was a human story, a struggle for survival, and a quest for meaning in the unpredictable tapestry of life. As we wander through the bustling heart of ancient Mesopotamia, let's take a moment to appreciate the economic engine that powered this civilization. Trade, agriculture, and yes, an impressive herd of sheep. Picture this. Mesopotamian bazaars were like the ancient version of your local farmer's market, just with more donkeys and fewer hipsters. These marketplaces were the epicenter of commerce, where traders haggled over everything from textiles to spices, their voices blending into a symphony of bartering that could put Wall Street to shame. Trade in Mesopotamia wasn't just a local affair. It was an international operation that stretched from the Indus Valley to Anatolia. Imagine, if you will, a merchant caravan loaded with goods, snaking its way across the desert, with traders exchanging goods like copper, timber, and lapis lazuli, a blue stone so dazzling it could make even the dullest clay tablet seem like a luxury item. These caravans weren't just about profit. They were the lifeline of Mesopotamian society, bringing in resources that simply couldn't be found in the land between the rivers. Now, let's talk agriculture, the true backbone of Mesopotamian economy. The region's fertile soil, courtesy of the Tigris and Euphrates, was a farmer's dream or nightmare, depending on the season. The unpredictable flooding of these rivers was both a blessing and a curse, a bit like winning the lottery only to realize it's in a currency no one uses anymore. But when the conditions were just right, the fields yielded barley, wheat, and dates in abundance, feeding armies and fueling trade. And speaking of barley, it wasn't just the breadwinner. It was the basis for beer, which was essentially the ancient Mesopotamian equivalent of Bitcoin, a currency that everyone wanted, but no one really understood. Beer was part of the daily diet and an essential element of religious rituals. It was so crucial that workers were often paid in rations of beer, which, let's face it, might make modern wage negotiations a tad more interesting. But what about the sheep, you ask? Well, these woolly creatures were the unsung heroes of the Mesopotamian economy. Sheep provided wool for textiles, a key export that clothed not just Mesopotamians, but also their trading partners. The importance of sheep was such that they often featured in economic records, making them the livestock equivalent of a blue-chip stock. Now, here's where things get really interesting: the role of women in this bustling economy. Contrary to some outdated stereotypes, women in Mesopotamia weren't just sitting at home weaving baskets and waiting for their husbands to return from the bazaar. They were active participants in the economy, running businesses, managing estates, and even acting as priestesses. In fact, some women owned property and slaves, engaging in trade with the same gusto as their male counterparts. So, the next time someone tries to tell you that the patriarchy has always been in charge, remind them that Mesopotamian women were breaking barriers long before it was cool. And let's not overlook the bureaucratic genius of the Mesopotamians, who managed to invent the world's first recorded credit disputes. That's right, folks, creditors and debtors have been squabbling over payments since at least 2000 BCE. These disputes were meticulously documented on clay tablets, complete with interest rates and repayment terms that would give modern bankers a run for their money. Take, for example, a loan tablet from the city of Ur, which details a transaction involving silver and barley, complete with a promise to repay by the next harvest. It's reassuring to know that human nature hasn't evolved much in the past few millennia. People have always found creative ways to owe each other money. Of course, the stakes were a bit higher back then. Failure to repay a debt could result in losing your land, your freedom, or even your family. But let's not get too bogged down in the grim details. The fact that Mesopotamians developed such a sophisticated system of credit speaks volumes about their economic ingenuity and their willingness to take risks, a trait that might explain why their civilization managed to thrive for so many centuries. In this whirlwind tour of Mesopotamian economics, it's clear that this ancient civilization was as complex as it was resourceful. From the bustling bazaars to the fertile fields, from the entrepreneurial women to the ever-present beer, Mesopotamia's economy was a tapestry of innovation and tradition, woven together with the threads of human ambition and resilience. So, as we journey forward into the depths of this ancient world, remember to tip your hat to the sheep, the scribes, and the savvy merchants who kept the wheels of commerce turning in the land of mud and clay. And keep in mind, the story doesn't end here. There's plenty more to unravel in the saga of Mesopotamia. Now, let's shift our gaze from the bustling bazaars and credit disputes to the celestial drama that played out in the minds of the Mesopotamians. You see, in Mesopotamia, religion wasn't just a Sunday affair. It was a full-time gig with a 24/7 hotline to the gods. And trust me, these gods were a handful. Think of them as the original divas, throwing cosmic tantrums that could make even the most patient saint lose their cool. At the heart of Mesopotamian spirituality was a pantheon of deities with more personality issues than a reality TV cast. Take Enlil, for instance, the god of air and storms, whose mood swings could make a hurricane seem like a gentle breeze. Or Inanna, goddess of love and war, proving that even in ancient times, those two concepts were inextricably linked. These gods didn't just sit on clouds playing harps, they actively interfered in human affairs, demanding sacrifices, loyalty, and sometimes just a bit of good old-fashioned flattery. But let's not get too carried away with the mythology. The truth is, these stories served a very practical purpose. They provided a framework for understanding a world where floods could obliterate your farm faster than you could say Tigris and Euphrates. Religion was the glue that held society together, a way to explain the inexplicable and find order in chaos. In a land where nature was as fickle as the gods themselves, rituals and prayers were insurance policies against the capricious whims of fate. Now, let's talk about those ominous omens. In Mesopotamia, predicting the future was practically a national pastime. Priests and diviners would interpret everything from the stars to sheep livers, searching for signs of divine approval or disapproval. If a king wanted to know whether launching a new conquest was a good idea, he didn't consult strategists. He consulted the gods. And what did the gods have to say? Well, that depended on how well you greased the wheels of celestial bureaucracy with offerings and rituals. But here's the kicker. While the gods were believed to be all-knowing, the priests were the ones who really pulled the strings. They were the original spin doctors, crafting narratives that kept the populace in line and the king's head on his shoulders. If things went wrong, it was never the priest's fault. It was the gods testing their people's faith. And if things went right, well, that was clearly due to the priest's astute guidance. It was a win-win situation for the clergy, who wielded power with the subtlety of a sledgehammer wrapped in velvet. Speaking of power, let's not forget the ziggurats, the temples that were the architectural embodiment of divine connection. These towering structures were more than just impressive piles of mud bricks. They were the nerve centers of Mesopotamian cities. Priests conducted rituals, stored grain, and even collected taxes within their walls. Imagine a combination of a church, a bank, and a government office, all rolled into one imposing edifice. The higher you climbed, the closer you got to the gods, or so they said. In reality, it was just a clever way to reinforce the hierarchy, with priests quite literally looking down on the laypeople. And then there were the rituals, which, let's be honest, could be a bit of a spectacle. From the Akiru festival, celebrating the new year, to the Sama rites honoring the dead, these ceremonies were elaborate affairs designed to reaffirm the social order and appease the gods. Take the Akiru, for example, a 12-day extravaganza involving processions, sacrifices, and a symbolic reenactment of the cosmos creation. It was a time for the king to prove his worth, renewing his mandate from the gods for another year of rule. And if he didn't measure up, well, let's just say it wasn't a great time to be a king. But don't be fooled into thinking that religion was all solemnity and sacrifice. There was room for joy and celebration too. Music, dance, and feasting were integral parts of religious life, offering a respite from the harsh realities of Mesopotamian existence. You could say that religion was the original form of entertainment, providing both spiritual solace and a good excuse to blow off some steam. Now, let's address the average Gilgamesh, the everyday citizen trying to navigate this divine minefield. For the common folk, religion was less about grand temples and more about personal piety. They prayed, made offerings, and sought favor from the gods in their daily lives. Whether it was a farmer hoping for a bountiful harvest or a merchant praying for safe travels, the gods were never far from their thoughts. Yet, despite the omnipresence of religion, Mesopotamian society was anything but monolithic. Different city-states had their own patron deities, and the pantheon evolved over time, reflecting shifts in power and culture. One city's god could be another's rival, and keeping everyone happy was a delicate balancing act. It was a bit like ancient diplomacy, but with more incense and fewer treaties. So, as we unravel the spiritual tapestry of Mesopotamia, let's remember that behind the myths and rituals were real people, grappling with existential questions and striving to make sense of their world. Religion was both a comfort and a tool of control, a way to navigate the uncertainties of life while maintaining the social order. And while the gods may have had questionable priorities, the people of Mesopotamia managed to carve out a civilization in their divine image, a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, even in the face of divine caprice. As we continue our journey through the annals of Mesopotamian history, keep in mind that the story doesn't end here. There's still much to explore in this land of mud and mystery, where the lines between myth and reality are as fluid as the rivers that gave it life. So stay tuned, because the next chapter in our tale promises even more intrigue and insight into the world that shaped civilization as we know it. As we continue our journey through the annals of Mesopotamian history, keep in mind that the story doesn't end here. There's still much to explore in this land of mud and mystery, where the lines between myth and reality are as fluid as the rivers that gave it life. So stay tuned, because the next chapter in our tale promises even more intrigue and insight into the world that shaped civilization as we know it. Now, let's turn our focus to the decline of Mesopotamia, a slow-motion train wreck that took centuries to unfold, yet still managed to crash with all the subtlety of a ziggurat toppling over. Imagine a civilization that had been the toast of the ancient world suddenly finding itself on the wrong side of history. The fall of Mesopotamia wasn't the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather a perfect storm of invasions, environmental shifts, and let's be honest, a touch of human stubbornness that that could rival a mule's. First, let's talk invasions. You see, Mesopotamia was like the popular kid in school who everyone wanted to hang out with, or, in this case, conquer. Its prime real estate, those fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates, made it a perennial target for every aspiring empire from the Akkadians to the Assyrians, and eventually the Babylonians and Persians. By 539 BCE, the last flicker of Mesopotamian independence was snuffed out by Cyrus the Great of Persia, a guy who knew how to conquer with style and efficiency. But the invasions were only part of the story. Mother Nature, that fickle mistress, decided to stir the pot by altering the course of the Tigris and Euphrates. These rivers, once the lifeblood of Mesopotamian agriculture, became unpredictable and occasionally downright hostile. Silted-up canals, salinization of the soil, and periodic droughts made farming a Herculean task, and no amount of divine intervention seemed to help. It's like trying to grow crops on a seesaw. Just when you think you've got it balanced, it tips the other way. Let's not forget the role of technology, or the lack thereof. While Mesopotamians were absolute legends for inventing things like the wheel, they didn't quite nail the renewable energy or sustainable agriculture departments. Their reliance on irrigation led to soil degradation over time, a problem they couldn't innovate their way out of before the crops started staging a protest. And then there's the social factor, human stubbornness. Mesopotamians were so entrenched in their ways that adapting to the changing world was like asking a cat to fetch a stick. The rigid social hierarchies that had once been their strength became a weakness, leaving little room for flexibility or innovation. It's a classic case of "we've always done it this way" syndrome, proving once again that tradition is a great servant but a terrible master. But before you start feeling too sorry for our Mesopotamian friends, remember that their legacy is anything but a cautionary tale. Despite the eventual collapse, the innovations they left behind continue to shape our world in ways they could never have imagined. Let's start with the basics. Writing. The cuneiform script was revolutionary, the ancient equivalent of inventing the internet. It allowed people to communicate, document laws, and share stories, laying the groundwork for everything from literature to legal systems. And then there's agriculture. The Mesopotamians didn't just farm. They transformed farming into a science, pioneering irrigation techniques that would influence civilizations long after theirs had crumbled into dust. Their understanding of crop cycles and soil management, though imperfect, set the stage for future agricultural advances. Politically, the concept of central governance that emerged in Mesopotamia has been a staple of societies ever since. City-states evolved into larger political entities, setting a precedent for future empires. And let's not forget the Hammurabi Code, one of the earliest examples of law and order that emphasized justice, albeit with a side of harsh penalties that would make Judge Judy blush. In terms of culture, the epic tales from Mesopotamia, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, offered more than just entertainment. They provided insights into the human condition, exploring themes of friendship, mortality, and the quest for meaning. These stories have echoed through the ages, reminding us that while civilizations may fall, the human spirit endures. So, what does the fall of Mesopotamia teach us? It's a timeless lesson in adaptability, innovation, and the dangers of complacency. History may not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes, and the story of Mesopotamia is a compelling verse in the grand poem of human history. As we tuck away our reed styluses and step back from the Fertile Crescent, let's remember that the echoes of this ancient world still resonate in our own, challenging us to learn from the past, even as we forge into the future.